Welcome back, legends. You're at Arcane Paradox. Another incredible story awaits. What if Fleur's Veela instinct shattered 43 soul blocks on Harry at Yule Ball and mate bond activated? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, 43. The Great Hall had never looked more like a dream someone else was having. Harry stood at the entrance in his dress robes, the deep green ones Dobby had somehow acquired 2 days before the ball, appearing at his bedside with the kind of frantic pride that made it impossible to refuse them, and watched the transformation of a room he'd eaten breakfast in 400 times. Thousands of floating candles had been replaced by enchanted ice sculptures that threw fractured light across the ceiling in patterns that moved like slow water. The 4 long house tables were gone entirely, replaced by dozens of smaller circular ones draped in silver and gold. The weird sisters were setting up at the far end near the transformed staff table, their instruments breathing small curls of violet smoke into the air. It looked like someone had taken Hogwarts and convinced it to forget itself for one evening. Parvati Patil stood beside him in robes the color of deep magenta, looking genuinely beautiful and genuinely irritated in equal measure, because Harry had already said it looks brilliant twice and both times had been staring in completely the wrong direction. "The doors open in 4 minutes," she said, with the tone of someone recalibrating expectations in real time. "Right," Harry said. "Sorry. It does look brilliant, though." "You said that already." "It's still true." She gave him a look that contained multitudes and offered her arm with the pragmatic grace of someone who had accepted that her evening's success was now entirely self-generated. Harry took it, and they joined the procession of champions forming near the entrance, Cedric and Cho, stunning and comfortable together in a way that Harry noticed without pain, which surprised him, Victor Crumb, moving through the crowd with the cautious deliberateness of someone who had learned that rooms tend to rearrange themselves around him, and Fleur Delacour. Harry had seen Fleur Delacour approximately 30 times since September. He had never actually looked at her. That distinction matters, and it requires a moment of honesty to explain it. Harry had grown up training himself not to look at things directly. You didn't look directly at Dudley's things or they became your fault. You didn't look directly at your aunt's expressions or you'd have to respond to them. You kept your eyes at a middle distance, seeing enough to navigate, not enough to invite. It was a survival habit so deeply grooved that he didn't know he was doing it anymore. So when Fleur Delacour moved through a room and every male within 20 feet lost the thread of their sentences, Harry had always existed in a peripheral awareness of her. Silver blonde hair. She was tall. French. Champion. Done. But tonight, standing 10 feet away while the procession organized itself, Harry actually looked. She was wearing robes of silver gray that caught the enchanted light and returned it as something warmer. Her hair was pinned up in a way that somehow looked effortless without being casual. She was saying something to a younger Beauxbatons girl beside her, something quick, reassuring, in French, and the girl's anxious face settled into something calmer. Then Fleur glanced sideways, scanning the procession, and her eyes passed over Harry and moved on, and then, as if something had snagged, moved back. She looked at him for 2 full seconds. Not the way most people looked at Harry Potter, which was either with awe or with the particular measuring quality of people deciding what he was worth. This was more like recognition, which made no sense, because they had exchanged perhaps 40 words between them across the entire autumn term. Then Headmistress Maxime signaled, the great doors opened, and the champions walked into the roar of the assembled school. The first hour of the Yule Ball was exactly what Harry had expected in all the worst ways. He danced with Parvati through the champions' first dance with the concentrated focus of someone diffusing a complex magical device, counting beats in his head, grateful for the 2 sessions of emergency practice Hermione had drilled him through in an empty classroom. He managed not to step on Parvati's feet more than twice. He considered this a provisional success. Then the weird sisters took over fully, the floor opened up to the whole school, and the evening dissolved into its social components, which for Harry meant standing near a pillar with a butterbeer he wasn't really drinking while Parvati found people she actually wanted to dance with, which he genuinely didn't mind, because Parvati deserved a good evening and he was clearly not going to be the architect of it. He watched the room. Ron was across the hall, tight-faced, sitting with Padma Patil, who had similarly assessed her situation and similarly detached. Fred and George had both charmed their dates, two Beauxbatons girls who were laughing so hard at something George had said that one of them was holding the table for support. Hermione was dancing with Victor Crumb, and she looked extraordinary, and Harry felt a complicated spike of I should have noticed that before, followed immediately by the awareness that he should probably go tell her she looked brilliant before Victor Crumb's deep-set eyes did all the communicating for him. He didn't go, because before he could, he became aware of a change in the room's atmosphere. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no sound. It was more like the moment before lightning, when the air pressure shifts and the hairs on your arms rise and the world seems to pause to draw a breath. Harry noticed it in his skin first, a warmth that didn't come from the room's temperature. Then in his chest, a sensation of pressure, not painful but significant, like someone pressing a hand flat against a door that had been sealed shut so long the wood had warped to the frame. He looked up. Fleur Delacour was 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the dance floor, and she was very still. The boy she'd been dancing with, some Beauxbaton's sixth year with ambitious hair, had said something she wasn't hearing. She was staring at nothing, her silver eyes unfocused, and her hands were pressed flat against her thighs like she was grounding herself against something. Harry recognized that posture. He'd worn it himself in potions when he could feel a panic rising that he couldn't explain and had no outlet for. Then her eyes snapped to his. The pressure in Harry's chest became something else entirely. It didn't hurt. That's the important part, it didn't hurt at all, which made it more alarming than pain would have been, because pain was familiar and this was not. It felt like a fist unclenching. Like a window that has been painted shut for years finally levered open, and cold clean air rushing in all at once, and you realize all at once how stale the air inside had become, and that you had been breathing that stale air your entire life and calling it normal. 43 things cracked. Not broke, cracked, like ice under pressure releasing all at once, fracture lines spiderwebbing outward from a central point. Harry felt each one. He couldn't have numbered them in that moment, but the feeling was precise. 43 distinct points of resistance in himself simply ceased to resist. He sat down. Not gracefully. He found the nearest chair and sat in it with the concentrated urgency of someone whose legs have decided to renegotiate their relationship with the concept of standing. The butterbeer landed on the table beside him without spilling, which was either luck or something else. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. That was the strangest part. He was shaking the way water shakes in a bowl when you set it down after carrying it, all that suppressed motion finding release. He pressed his palms against his knees and breathed through his nose and tried to inventory what had just happened inside him, which was like trying to describe a landscape you've just seen for the first time after a lifetime of looking at maps of it. He felt larger. Not physically, he was still 14, still underfed, still wearing borrowed dress robes. But there was more room in him than there'd been 60 seconds ago. More space. As if 43 separate walls he'd never questioned had simply stopped standing. His magic felt different too. It had always been there, a current below everything, the thing that responded when he was desperate or frightened or focused. But right now it didn't feel like a current. It felt like a river that has just been given a proper channel, running clear and fast and purposeful, and he could feel the edges of it, which he'd never been able to do before. He could feel how large it was. He thought, with the peculiar calm of someone in mild shock, that's been there the whole time. You should probably breathe more slowly. He looked up. Fleur Delacour had crossed the 20 feet of dance floor with the quiet efficiency of someone navigating toward a specific destination, and she was standing beside his table looking at him with an expression that he couldn't quite categorize. Not concern, exactly. Closer to the look of someone who has triggered something they understood intellectually but are now experiencing at a scale that outpaces the intellect. I am breathing, Harry said. Faster than necessary. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, which was not something he'd expected her to do. Do you feel ill? No. He considered this more carefully. Actually no. I feel, no. Not ill. Good. She set her small silver bag on the table and folded her hands over it. Her voice was composed but her jaw was set in a way that suggested composure was doing active work. I owe you an explanation. And an apology. For what? For what just happened? She glanced at the dancers, lowering her voice slightly, not because anyone was close, but with the instinct of someone who has learned that some conversations have a radius they need to control. Veela nature, it is not always something we fully control. Especially the deeper instincts. There was a moment when something in me reacted very strongly to something in you, and I lost control of it briefly. The pulse that you felt, that was you. Yes. Harry looked at her. She met the look steadily, which he appreciated. What did it do? A flicker in those silver eyes. I think you know. I can feel my own magic, he said, testing the statement. Properly. For the first time, actually. Did you do that? No. I revealed it. She said the distinction like it mattered, and Harry's new, spacious sense of himself agreed that it did. Veela instinct at its deepest level can perceive things that normal magic cannot. It is designed, we are designed, to see our chosen. Fully. Without layers. A brief, controlled pause. You had layers, Mr. Potter. Many of them. And my instinct did not ask permission before removing them. Harry sat with that for a moment. The weird sisters were playing something fast and celebratory. Across the room, Ron was sulking at a level visible from space. None of it touched the peculiar quiet that had settled inside Harry since the blocks cracked. 43, he said. The number was simply there, exact and certain, the way you know the number of stairs in a staircase you've walked every day. Fleur's composure shifted slightly. Not breaking, adjusting. You can count them. I can feel where they were. He flexed his fingers. His magic moved with him, responsive and immediate in a way it had never quite been before. Who puts 43 soul blocks on a child? Fleur opened her mouth and closed it again. It was the most unguarded thing he'd seen her do. That is the right question, she said finally. And I do not know the full answer. But you have a partial one. She looked at him with something that was adjacent to respect. Some of them feel like ambient damage. Environmental. Long exposure to a magic-suppressing environment, a household with no magical affection, possibly active hostility. That layered naturally over years. She paused. And some of them feel deliberate. Placed. With intent. The music played. Harry let the word deliberate sit in his chest. It didn't make him angry, not yet. It made him clear-headed in a way he couldn't remember feeling before, and that clarity turned the word deliberate over and looked at all its surfaces. How does a Veela's mate instinct work? He asked. Technically. If she was surprised by the directness, she covered it efficiently. It is not a spell and not a choice. It is recognition. The deepest layer of Veela nature, older than language, older than formal magic, can identify a soul that is compatible at a fundamental level. When I lost control of my instinct tonight, it was because it found what it was looking for without warning me first. A perfectly calibrated pause. I was as surprised as you were. More surprised, probably, Harry said. You're the one who's known this could happen. Technically, yes. Something shifted in her expression, the faintest acknowledgement of humor. Practically, one hears about mate bonds. One does not expect to encounter one at a school ball at 16. I'm 14, Harry said. I am aware. Does that complicate the bond? It complicates many things, she said. The bond itself does not recognize ages. But I do. We will not, she made a precise small gesture with one hand. I want to be clear about what I am offering, which is not, I am not asking you to be anything to me right now except someone I understand to be important. The bond is real. What we do with that information can be decided by people, not by instinct. Harry looked at her. He thought about the sensation of 43 walls ceasing to stand, and about the feeling of his magic running clear and large and purposeful, and about a girl who had just lost control of something ancient and personal and had immediately sat down across from him and told him the truth about it. "You could have pretended it didn't happen," he said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because," she said, with a simplicity that landed like a stone dropping into still water, "it happened. And you deserve to know why." Nobody had ever said anything quite like that to Harry before. Not in that particular configuration of words. You deserve to know why. As if the knowing was his right, not something granted conditionally by people who'd decided how much he should understand about his own life. He became aware that his hands had stopped shaking. "All right," he said. "Then let's figure it out." Across the hall, Ron Weasley was not having a good time, and the specific shape of his bad time had shifted 3 times in the last 10 minutes. It had started as general sulking, the dress robes, Hermione looking the way Hermione apparently looked when she tried, Victor Crumb's infuriating jaw, the whole evening having a quality of everyone else's story happening without him. That was familiar territory and Ron knew how to operate in it. Then it had shifted into specific irritation, because Harry, who had been standing by the pillar in that particular way Harry stood when he was trying to be invisible, which Ron recognized because he'd been watching Harry navigate the world for 3 years, had suddenly sat down sharply, like a string had been cut, and then Fleur Delacour, had walked across the dance floor and sat down across from him and was currently talking to him in a way that did not look like small talk. Ron squinted across the hall. Harry looked different. That was the 3rd shift. He couldn't have said exactly how, same dress robes, same messy hair, same glasses. But the way he was sitting had changed. Harry usually occupied space with a certain tentativeness, as if he was waiting for permission. Right now he was sitting like someone who had recently received confirmation of something they'd suspected. He was leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, talking to Fleur Delacour as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and she was listening with focused attention, and the whole tableau had a quality that made the hairs on the back of Ron's neck rise. "He's talking to Fleur Delacour," he said, mostly to himself. Padma Patil, who had been conducting a private examination of the ice sculpture nearest their table, glanced over. "Yes," she said, with the tone of someone confirming a statement that contains its own explanation. "Why is he talking to Fleur Delacour?" Perhaps because she sat down at his table and said something. Ron squinted harder. Whatever was happening over there, it did not look accidental. And Harry, there it was again, that different quality Ron couldn't name. He reached for it and caught it. Harry wasn't performing anything. He wasn't trying to seem relaxed or seem confident or seem anything. He simply was, the way people usually only were when they were alone and forgot to maintain the performance. Ron had known Harry for 3 years and he had never once seen him look like that in public. He looked away, because looking at it too long produced a low, unreasonable feeling in his chest that he had enough self-awareness to understand and not enough generosity to immediately conquer. Albus Dumbledore stood near the archway that led to the rose garden, holding a glass of elderflower wine he had not drunk, and watching Harry Potter sit at a table with Fleur Delacour with an expression that his entire life's practice of composure was currently being required to contain. He had felt it. Every magically sensitive person in the room had felt it, although most of them had processed it as a shiver, a brief warmth, a momentary improvement in the music. Dumbledore had felt it with the precision of a man who had spent 60 years mapping the magical architecture of a specific person's soul. 43 blocks. He had placed 11 of them himself, over the course of 4 separate interventions beginning when Harry was 15 months old. The rest had accumulated naturally, which he had permitted to accumulate, because ambient suppression served the same purpose as deliberate suppression and carried none of the risk of discovery. He had not been cruel. He wanted to be clear about that in his own mind. He had not been cruel. He had been careful. He had understood, from the night Lily and James died, that Harry Potter unrestrained was a possibility the world was not ready for, that Voldemort was not the only threat a fully realized Harry Potter represented, and that a boy who understood his own power at 11, at 12, at 14, was a boy who would make choices based on that power rather than the choices a greater good required. He had been careful. And in the space of 60 seconds, Fleur Delacour's Veela instinct had undone 4 years of careful. Dumbledore watched Harry lean forward across the table, asking something. Watched Fleur answer it directly, without the social deflection she deployed on almost everyone. Watched Harry absorb the answer and ask another question, because that was what an unblocked Harry Potter did. He pursued the thread, followed the logic, arrived at conclusions with the systematic clarity that was his actual nature rather than the reactive, emotional, survival mode responsiveness that Dumbledore had come to think of as Harry. He took a small sip of his wine. He thought about what this meant for plans that were 10 years in construction. He thought about contingencies. He thought about Tom Riddle, who would feel this change eventually, not tonight, but soon, because powerful magic leaves resonance, and what had just happened to Harry Potter was not a small magic. Most of all he thought about the conversation that was now inevitable. Because Harry, unblocked, would start asking questions. And Harry, unblocked, was very good at questions. He would have to handle this carefully. More carefully than he'd handled anything in years. He set his wine glass down and went to find Professor Moody. The ball wound down in stages. The Weird Sisters finished their last set, and the enchanted ice sculptures cycled through their final configurations, and students began drifting toward the doors in the pleasant exhaustion of an evening successfully experienced. Parvati found Harry at 1:45 and thanked him without irony for the evening. She had danced with 4 different partners after the first hour and had a brilliant time, which she said with cheerful directness that Harry appreciated more than performed politeness would have been. "You've been talking to Fleur Delacour all night," she observed. Not accusing, noting. "Yeah," Harry said. Parvati looked at him with the assessing intelligence that Harry had, frankly, underestimated all year. "You look different than you did when we walked in." "Good different or bad different?" She tilted her head. "Like someone turned a light on," she said, and then went to find her sister without needing the comment explained. Fleur had said, 3/4 of an hour ago, that she should return to the Beauxbatons group. Her headmistress would notice the absence, and the Beauxbatons girls had a curfew that Maxime enforced with the diplomatic thoroughness of someone who understood liability. But she had looked at Harry across the table and done a calculation he could see happening in real time. "Tomorrow," she'd said. Not formally. "I have a habit of walking by the lake at 7:30 in the morning. The wards on the Beauxbatons carriage permit departure before breakfast." "I have a habit of being awake at 7:30, Harry said. It was true, childhood habits die hard, and Harry's body had a morning alarm built into it by years of Aunt Petunia that no amount of wizard dormitory comfort had erased. "Then we have something in common," Fleur said, and stood, and picked up her silver bag, and walked back toward the Beauxbatons table with the composed elegance of someone who had not just experienced the activation of an ancient instinct bond and the shattering of 4+ years of magical suppression in the space of an evening. Harry watched her go and felt the bond like a thread, not constricting, not pulling, just there, the way your awareness of your own heartbeat is there when you pay attention to it. He didn't feel swept away by it. He felt, if anything, more himself than he'd been before it. Which was either the strangest thing about Veela mate bonds or the most sensible thing, depending on your perspective. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower with Ron and Hermione, who were arguing. This was not unusual. The argument was about Crumb, which was also not unusual. But Harry's attention was only partially on it, because the rest of him was running very quietly through a list. 43 soul blocks. 11 deliberate. He had felt them crumbling, had felt the difference between the ones that were environmental, a thick, settled weight, layered over years, like paint applied in dozens of thin coats until the texture beneath disappeared, and the ones that were intentional, sharper, precise, placed with the specific quality of a craftsman's work, each one sitting in a location that wasn't random. Environmental blocks happened because they happened. Deliberate blocks were placed by someone who knew what they were doing and had a reason for doing it. He thought about who in his life had the capability and the access. The Dursleys had no magic to speak of beyond the ambient suppressive effect of a household in which magic was despised. That accounted for the environmental ones. The precise ones, the 11 Harry could still feel the specific edges of, even now, those required a magical practitioner of considerable skill. Someone who had access to Harry before Hogwarts, or who had arranged access during the school year in ways Harry hadn't noticed. There weren't many candidates. Harry climbed through the portrait hole, said goodnight to Ron and Hermione, and went up to the dormitory. Neville was already asleep. Seamus was telling Dean about the evening in the enthusiastic shorthand of best friends. Harry changed, got into bed, and lay in the dark thinking with a new, unobstructed clarity that felt like finally using the whole page instead of writing in the margins. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about a chess piece being moved very deliberately across a board. He thought about Hagrid saying I'd like to know who told ya when Harry had been 9 years old and had asked why a wizard might not want someone to know about magic, and how Hagrid had changed the subject so smoothly that Harry had forgotten the question. He thought about Fleur's voice, some of them feel deliberate. Placed. With intent. He thought about being 14 years old and somehow having ended up in a deadly tournament that the entry age requirement was supposed to prevent. He thought about all the times he'd felt a rising surge of his own power and then felt it, not exactly disappear, but flatten, as if a ceiling had been lowered without him noticing. He'd always assumed that was just how magic worked. Now he understood it was how blocked magic worked, and the difference between those two things was the difference between a bird in a small cage and a bird in a field. He was in the field now. Tomorrow would be interesting. He closed his eyes. The bond sat quietly in his chest like a warm coal, not burning, not urgent, simply present. He thought about Fleur's silver eyes and the precise, respectful way she'd sat across from him and told him the truth, and the relief in being told the truth by someone who had every reason to obscure it. He thought about the word chosen, and how it was different from designated. The whole world had designated Harry Potter for a purpose before he could walk. Fleur's instinct had chosen him, which was a thing nobody had ever done before, and the distinction was one his newly unblocked heart had no trouble at all distinguishing. He slept, and dreamed of open water and silver light, and for the first time in memory woke up before his internal alarm, hours before dawn, simply because he wanted to. He was at the lake at 6:30. Earlier than he'd said. The morning was sharp and cold, the kind of December morning that makes the world look cleaned. The lake's surface was perfectly still, and the giant squid's shadow was just visible under the near water, a dark shape moving in a slow, purposeful circle that suggested the squid was having a much more organized morning than anyone else at Hogwarts. Harry sat on a flat rock at the water's edge, his breath misting, his magic sitting easily inside him like something that belonged there. He watched the light change across the water. He thought about nothing in particular, which was new. He had always been a person with an anxious internal monologue, always cataloging threats and exits and the social temperature of any room. Right now the monologue was quiet. Not suppressed. Just quiet, in the way of something that doesn't need to run continuously because the person running it knows how to handle what comes. Fleur arrived at 6:47, 13 minutes before she'd said she would, and she did not look surprised to find him already there. She was in a blue winter cloak with her hair down, which was the first time he'd seen it that way outside of her own carriage. She looked 17, a fact her composed self tended to transcend but which appeared here, in the early morning without the formality of tournament or ball, with clarity. She was a 17-year-old girl who was Veela and brilliant and carrying the weight of something she hadn't asked for, and she was doing it with the kind of grace that comes not from ease but from practice. She sat beside him on the rock. Not close. A respectful distance. She looked at the lake. "You slept," she said. It wasn't a question. "Better than I have in years," Harry said. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd calculated. The bond stabilizes when both parties are at peace with it. Are you at peace with it? A beat. The squid's shadow completed its circuit. I am at peace with what it is. I am still, processing what it will mean. That's reasonable, Harry said. For what it's worth, I'm not expecting anything from you. I don't know how mate bonds work in practice, and I know we're different ages and from different countries and in the middle of a tournament where we're technically competitors, so. Fleur looked at him sideways. You are listing reasons it is complicated. I'm noting that it is complicated, and that I'm fine with complicated. I just wanted you to know that. He paused. I grew up in a house where I was expected to want something and then punished for having needs, so I've developed a preference for stating what I actually think rather than hinting at it and waiting for people to guess. The silence after that was the kind that isn't empty. Fleur turned to look at him fully, and the silver eyes had something in them that hadn't been there last night, not more warmth exactly, but a different quality of attention. You do that very directly, she said. State things. Is it too much? No. She returned her gaze to the lake. It is rare. Most people, most boys especially, they talk around things. They build elaborate constructions that are supposed to communicate something while maintaining deniability. A small, precise breath. I have spent 2 years navigating boys who cannot decide whether to be enchanted by me or angry at me for enchanting them, and very few who simply speak. I'm 14, I've been in 3 life-threatening situations in 4 years, and I just had 43 suppression blocks removed from my soul, Harry said. I don't really have space for elaborate constructions. She laughed. It was brief and genuine and surprised her, and for a moment she looked entirely, unambiguously 17. No, she agreed. I suppose you don't. Tell me something about the bond, Harry said. Not the theory. What does it feel like, for you? Another of her calibrated pauses. He was beginning to understand these pauses. They weren't hesitation, they were precision. She was selecting the exact word instead of an approximate one. Like I am standing in a room I have been in before, she said. Not déjà vu, not the sensation of I have done this. More like the sensation of this is where I belong, which is not a thing I have ever felt at full strength before. Usually it is a quiet thing, small, easy to set aside. She folded her hands in her lap. Last night it was not small. What made it happen last night? Specifically. Honestly? She glanced at him. I think it was the blocking. Your magic was struggling toward me, or toward something, I do not know which, and the blocks were causing it to surge repeatedly. The instinct responds to distress. It responded to yours, and the response removed the cause of the distress. A pause. I had been feeling it all autumn. I thought it was ambient, the bond recognizing proximity but not enough to activate fully. Last night the distress level crossed a threshold. Harry thought about that for a while. He thought about autumn, potions lessons and defense lessons and flying practice and the tournament, all of it threaded with these moments of frustrated power that he'd always chalked up to stress or adrenaline. All of it, apparently, his own magic pressing against walls someone else had built. 11 of the blocks were deliberate, he said. Fleur was quiet. I know, Harry said. You weren't going to lead with that. I was not going to tell you something I cannot prove before you had a chance to what? Not be angry about it. To have the information clearly, without my interpretation shaping it. She turned to him. What you do with what happened to you is your decision. I am not interested in managing that decision. Harry looked at the lake for a long moment. A fish jumped. Ripples spread. The giant squid's shadow moved toward the deep water. I'm not angry, he said, testing the feeling. Not yet. I think the anger is there, I can feel where it lives. But right now it's underneath something else. What is the something else? He had to think about how to say it accurately. Relief, he said finally. And, being interested. Like I've just found out that I'm a much more interesting problem than I thought I was. Fleur smiled. Not the practiced, public smile that moved through rooms, the private one, the quick, genuine turn of mouth that he'd caught for a second the night before. That is a very specific way to feel about having blocks removed from your soul. I'm a specific person, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said, with a note in her voice that was too layered to parse in a single morning. You are. The sun finished clearing the castle's eastern tower. It hit the lake's surface and broke into 1,000 pieces of gold. Harry sat beside Fleur Delacour on a cold rock in December and felt 43 absences in himself, and in each absence he could feel something true growing into the space that had been made. Far above them, in a high window of the castle, a set of half-moon spectacles caught the same morning light. The man behind them stood very still, watching two small figures by the water, and thought about contingencies. About timelines. About the controlled release of information. About the ways a deeply invested chess player might move a piece that has just become unexpectedly autonomous. About whether the game was still the game he had been playing. He turned from the window. He had letters to write. Decisions to make. And very little time, now, before the boy who had just found the full volume of himself began asking the questions that had always been sitting there, waiting for the blocks to come down. He went to write his letters. Chapter 2, What the Mirror Missed. The first thing Harry did the morning after the Yule Ball, after returning from the lake, after climbing back through the portrait hole while the castle still held that particular pre-breakfast quiet, was magic. Not performed magic. Not Wingardium Leviosa or a defensive charm or anything with a name. He sat cross-legged on his bed with the curtains drawn and he simply felt his own magic, the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue except the opposite, because this didn't hurt at all. It was more like finding a room in your house you'd always walked past assuming it was a cupboard. It was not a cupboard. It was enormous. He spent 40 minutes doing nothing but knowing it, the reach of it, the temperature of it, the way it responded when he paid attention, quickening slightly the way a dog lifts its head when you look at it. He had always been told he had power. His professors said it in careful, qualified ways that suggested they found the fact mildly inconvenient. His enemies said it in ways designed to make it sound like a threat. Nobody had ever actually let him sit with it and understand it as something simply his. When Neville's alarm went off and the dormitory began its morning scramble, Harry opened his curtains and picked up his wand and cast a simple lumos. The light that came from his wand was the same light it always produced, warm white, steady, nothing theatrical. But the effort required was nothing at all. Less than breathing. He said knocks and the light went out and he thought, all right then. The great hall for breakfast had the specific atmosphere of a school morning after a major event. Approximately 3/4 of the students were still partially inside the previous night, glowing or sullen depending on their experience of it. The weird sisters had been spotted having toast at the staff table, which caused a minor sensation among second years. Several couples who had formed at the ball were navigating the complicated morning after logistics of a first date in an environment where everyone already knew everything about everyone. Harry ate eggs and thought. Ron sat across from him, working through a plate of everything with the determined appetite of someone using food as emotional processing. He'd said 3 words since they'd come down, morning, past the pumpkin juice, and Crumb spoken as a single expletive under his breath when Victor Crumb walked through the doors and Hermione looked up from her book. Ron's approach to complicated feelings had always been to compress them into a dense, heavy ball and carry it around until something forced it to decompress, usually explosively and at the wrong moment. Harry knew this pattern very well and usually tried to head it off. This morning he didn't have the architecture for it, he had too much of his own inventory to take. Hermione sat beside Harry with her book propped against the juice pitcher and her hair back in its usual configuration. The extraordinary version of herself from last night had retired. She was back to being the person who arrived to breakfast having already done half the day's reading, which was, Harry thought, genuinely more remarkable than looking stunning in blue robes. It required consistency rather than occasion. "You were talking to Fleur Delacour for most of last night," she said, without looking up from her book. "Yes," Harry said. She turned a page. "And this morning you were down by the lake before sunrise." 6:30, Technically. Now she looked up. Hermione had very good peripheral awareness and deployed it constantly, which meant she missed very little and said even less about most of it until she'd formed a conclusion. Harry could see the conclusion forming. "And you look different," she said. "People keep saying that. Because it's true." She studied him with the focused assessment of someone running through possible explanations. "Did something happen at the ball? Something magical?" Harry looked at Ron, who was stabbing a sausage with unnecessary force and clearly listening to every word. "Yeah," Harry said. "I'll explain properly at some point." "Nothing dangerous," he added, because Hermione's expression had moved toward contingency planning. "Actually the opposite. The opposite of dangerous. I know it sounds strange. Harry, you put your name in a goblet that entered you in a tournament you might die in and called it fine. My calibration for your version of not dangerous is flexible." But something in her face had relaxed slightly. She looked at him again, the really looking, and said more quietly, "You do seem different. Not anxious. You're normally anxious in the mornings. You're normally monitoring about 5 things simultaneously and hoping none of them escalate. Right now you look like someone who's finished that particular job." "That is," Harry said, reaching for his pumpkin juice, "actually quite accurate." Ron's knife hit his plate with more force than required. "What happened with Fleur Delacour?" "Not a question. A declaration of needing to know." Harry set his glass down. He felt clear. Not defensive, not careful, just clear, which was the new baseline. "She sought me out last night. Something happened with her Veela instinct. We talked about it." "Her Veela instinct," Ron repeated, with the specific tone of a person who has decided an answer is a deflection. "Ron, I know what you're thinking. Harry, she's Fleur Delacour, she does that to everyone, her whole thing is that Ron." Harry's voice didn't rise. It didn't go cold either. It was simply level, in a way Ron clearly wasn't expecting, because he stopped talking. "I know the difference between Veela allure and this. So does she. That's why she came and told me about it directly instead of, whatever you're imagining." Ron stared at him. Whatever he saw in Harry's face made him close his mouth. Hermione was watching both of them over her book with the expression of someone who is learning things faster than anyone is telling them. "Right," Ron said eventually, and returned to his breakfast, and the conversation moved to other things, but Harry felt Ron's eyes on him twice more in the next 20 minutes, each time with that same quality, not the familiar, comfortable assessment of a best friend checking in, but something more unsettled. The look of someone who has just discovered that a thing they understood has turned out to be something they don't. The Hogwarts library at 9 in the morning on the 24th of December was entirely empty except for Harry and Madame Pants, who was performing her traditional routine of eyeing every student who entered as if they were planning to harm the books personally. Harry had been using this library for 3 years and had never given her any actual cause for complaint, which had not softened her even marginally. He found what he was looking for in the restricted section, not because he'd sneaked in, but because he'd walked up to Madame Pants and asked for access, citing 4th-year advanced magical theory, and she had stared at him for 6 seconds, which was apparently her version of deliberation, and then issued him a temporary pass with the clipped efficiency of someone who had decided resistance required more energy than compliance. He'd asked because he could. Because it had simply occurred to him to ask, directly, rather than planning an elaborate workaround. This was new. He sat with the small strangeness of it as he pulled a thick, dark-spined volume called Soul Architecture and Magical Impediment, a practitioner's guide from the shelf and took it to a table in the far corner. The book was dry reading, written with the self-congratulatory density of an academic text that had never been edited for a human reader. But Harry moved through it with the steady attention of someone who has decided a thing is important enough to do properly. He found what he needed on page 212. Soul blocks, unlike general magical suppression, operate on a tiered system of complexity. The most basic form, environmental suppression, arises naturally when a magical individual spends formative years in an environment hostile to magical expression. These blocks are numerous but relatively shallow, and typically dissolve without intervention upon exposure to a sustained magical environment. See Chapter 14 for observed recovery timelines. More complex are deliberate architectural blocks, impediments placed by a skilled practitioner directly into the magical psychological matrix of an individual, often timed to activate at developmental thresholds to maintain a consistent ceiling on power expression. These require significant skill to place and are extraordinarily difficult to detect, as they mimic the signature of ambient suppression under standard diagnostic examination. Removal requires either a practitioner of sufficient skill to disassemble each block individually, a process requiring weeks or months, or a sufficiently powerful emotional or instinctual catalyst capable of shattering the entire structure simultaneously. Harry read that last sentence 3 times. Removal requires either a practitioner of sufficient skill to disassemble each block individually, or a sufficiently powerful emotional or instinctual catalyst capable of shattering the entire structure simultaneously. He turned to Chapter 14, which dealt with diagnostic examination and the detection of placed blocks. He read for another 40 minutes, taking no notes. His memory had always been good and was now, unobstructed, considerably better. When he'd absorbed what the chapter had to offer, he sat back and thought about what he now knew. Placed blocks mimicked environmental ones under standard examination. Which meant that if a Hogwarts healer had ever examined him, and they hadn't, specifically, he'd been to the hospital wing more times than he could count but always for injuries, never for a general magical diagnostic, they would likely have seen only the environmental layer unless they were specifically looking for deliberate placement. Someone who knew this would know that a child could be blocked without discovery. Someone who had access to a 15-month-old Harry Potter, or to Harry at any point in the subsequent 13 years, could have used this. Harry thought about who had carried him out of Godric's Hollow. Who had arranged his placement with the Dursleys. Who had the magical knowledge and the philosophical framework that could, if you tilted it slightly, justify such a thing as necessary. He didn't say the name, even in his head. Not because he was afraid of it. He'd stopped being afraid of Voldemort's name, at minimum, in his first year. He didn't say it because naming a conclusion before he could prove it was the kind of emotional thinking he was specifically trying to avoid. He needed evidence. He needed more information. He needed Fleur. Not because she was his answer to everything, he had enough self-awareness to understand the difference between a mate bond and an intellectual crutch. But Fleur had perceived the blocks from the outside, which meant she had a sensory perspective on them that Harry couldn't replicate from the inside. She had also grown up in the Veela tradition, which had its own deep magic scholarship that ran entirely parallel to wizarding academia and frequently arrived at conclusions that wizarding academia spent decades catching up to. He closed the book. He stood. He thought about what he was going to do next with the same clarity he'd applied to everything this morning, and it was so different from the usual method of pinballing from crisis to response that he took a moment to simply appreciate the difference. He walked out of the library, nodded to Madame Pants, and went to find breakfast, because it was nearly 10 and he'd eaten too lightly and he'd learned enough in one morning. The rest could wait until the walk he'd already arranged. She was waiting at the edge of the Forbidden Forest when he came back out at 11:30, having collected a jacket and, on impulse, 2 of the flat rock cakes from the house elves, not because they were particularly good, but because bringing something was the kind of small courteous act that nobody had ever modeled for him and that he'd decided, somewhere in the last 12 hours, he wanted to practice. Fleur looked at the rock cakes when he offered them and then looked at him with an expression containing visible amusement. "What are those?" "The house elves call them rock cakes." "That's both a name and an accurate structural description. They're not bad if you've had 3 cups of tea first." She took one with the air of someone accepting a social situation they hadn't anticipated. "You brought food. You walked across a cold castle ground to an arranged meeting and you probably didn't have time for full breakfast." It seemed practical. A pause, in which she very clearly ran through possible responses and selected honesty. "Nobody brings me things," she said. "Usually people are trying to impress me. The bringing things dynamic requires actually thinking about whether I might want something, which is different. I gathered the bar was on the floor, Harry said. I'm aiming for slightly above the floor. She laughed again, the real one, the brief one, and they walked. The path along the edge of the forest was clear of snow due to some property of the trees that Harry had never investigated and probably didn't want to. Their breath misted. Their footsteps sounded on frozen ground. Somewhere deep in the forest something moved through underbrush in a way that suggested it was very large and very unconcerned about being heard. I spent this morning in the library, Harry said. I expected you would. Soul Architecture and Magical Impediment, A Practitioner's Guide. Chapter 12 and 14. Chapter 12 on Placement Methodology, Chapter 14 on Detection. She had clearly read it. The detection section was useful. Placed blocks mimic environmental ones under standard examination. Yes. She bit into the rock cake, evaluated it with the expression of someone recalibrating, and continued anyway. It means the person who placed the deliberate blocks on you understood exactly how to hide their work. This was not improvised. It was planned, Harry said. Long term. And updated, I could feel the different ages of them. Some of the deliberate ones were placed much earlier than others. The most recent felt cleaner. More sophisticated. Fleur glanced at him. You can date them. Roughly. Can you? She was quiet for a moment. From what I perceived last night, yes. The earliest deliberate block felt very old. Infant-aged. Placed before you could walk. She said it with the care of someone aware of what they're delivering. And you are right that they escalated in sophistication. Whoever placed them improved their technique over time. Harry absorbed this without stopping walking, without changing his pace. The anger was still there, a clean ember below the surface. He kept it below. So someone has been maintaining them. It would appear so. During the school year. Not just before Hogwarts. The most recent block was placed within the last 18 months, based on what I felt. It had the quality of a refreshed constraint rather than a new one. She paused. Harry. I want to be careful not to tell you what to do with this information. You're not telling me what to do. You're telling me facts. The facts are pointing somewhere specific. I know where they're pointing, he said. I've known since last night. I'm not going to do anything rash. I need more before I say anything to anyone, and I need to say the right things to the right people in the right order. He looked at her sideways. I'm not the person who goes charging into things without thinking. Fleur considered this for a second. Your reputation somewhat contradicts that. My reputation is based on what I did while running on blocked magic, chronic stress, and nobody telling me anything useful until I was already in danger. He paused. Things may develop differently from here. She stopped walking. He stopped a half-step later and turned to look at her. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite fully read, something that had layers the way her pauses did, each one sitting precisely behind the other. How are you this calm, she said. Not an accusation. Genuine question. Harry thought about it honestly. Because I can feel the whole picture now, he said. Before last night, I was always reactive. Something would happen and I'd respond to it in the moment because I didn't have enough information or enough power to see past the immediate crisis. Now I can feel the edges of things. I can think 3 moves instead of just the current one. He watched her watching him. And I think some of the anxiety I had was the blocks. Suppressed power doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. It became fear. It became that constant background noise of something is about to go wrong. He paused. It's gone. The noise is gone. Fleur was quiet for a moment that was different from her precision pauses. This one was something she was feeling through rather than thinking through. The bond feels like that for me, she said eventually. Like something that was always there, always making noise below everything, has finally been given a name. And the naming quieted it. Does it bother you? Harry asked. Honestly. It frightens me, she said, with the simplicity of someone who has decided that honesty is more valuable than dignity here. Not because of you, because of how much it matters. I have spent 16 years being very good at not needing things. The bond requires me to need something. That is not comfortable. I'm not going to use that, Harry said. The fact that you need it. I won't leverage it. She looked at him. You are 14, she said, and it was not dismissive, it was almost wondering. How are you this, where did this come from? I've spent 14 years being very carefully managed by people who did it with my best interests as the stated reason, Harry said. I know what it looks like from the inside. I'm not interested in doing it to someone else. She turned and started walking again. He fell into step beside her. The forest breathed on their left, enormous and old and indifferent. Tell me what you know about the second task, she said, transitioning with the efficiency of someone who has decided the emotional frequency needs a rest to be sustained. Not the official information. What you know. Something in the lake. We have to retrieve something taken from us. 1 hour. He paused. You. The same information. She was quiet for a moment. I am concerned about the lake. My fire magic performs poorly in water environments. It is not a secret, but it is a weakness I prefer not to broadcast. How did you do in the first task? Better than I should have, with the dragon. I used a Confundus adjacent charm. She glanced at him. And you? Everyone saw what you did with your firebolt. I figured if I was flying I couldn't be set on fire, Harry said. Basic threat reduction. It was also, she said, with measured precision, genuinely brilliant. The angle of approach to the egg, the way you drew the horntail out into open air before engaging, that was not improvised. Mostly improvised, Harry said honestly. But I could feel what the dragon was going to do before it did it. I could read it. He paused. I think the block suppressed that too. I've always been able to read magical creatures. I thought everyone could. They cannot, Fleur said flatly. Yeah. I'm starting to understand that a lot of the things I thought were normal aren't. They walked the full circuit of the forest's safe perimeter, about 40 minutes, at their pace, and then turned back toward the castle. The December light was thin and pale and very clear, the kind of light that shows the world without flattering it. Hogwarts from this angle looked exactly like what it was, a very old building that had absorbed centuries of magic until it practically was magic, that creaked and shifted and dreamed and would outlast everyone inside it. Harry looked at it. He thought about who else was inside it. I need to access the school's magical registry, he said. Every spell cast within Hogwarts is logged. Not the content, but the caster and the approximate location. Dumbledore has access to the full record. But there's a partial record in the deputy headmistress's office that students can petition to see for academic purposes. Fleur looked at him. You want to see if there is a record of spellcasting in your vicinity during your school years. If someone was refreshing blocks on me during the term, they were doing it somewhere in this castle. If there's even a partial log, the type of magic used to place blocks would not appear in a standard spell registry, Fleur said. It is too subtle. It would look like ambient enhancement charms, or a localized medical spell. But the caster location would be there. If they were careless, yes. She paused. And if whoever placed these blocks was also the most powerful wizard in the castle, they might not have been particularly worried about being careless. They would not expect anyone to look. The castle gate was 10 steps ahead. Harry pushed it open. Warm air from the entrance hall reached them. That is a very specific assumption about who placed them, Fleur said carefully. I know. Harry stepped through the gate and held it for her. I'm not going to say his name out loud yet. But you know who I mean. Yes, she said quietly. I know who you mean. They parted in the entrance hall, She went toward the marble staircase, he went toward the corridor that led to the Transfiguration wing, where he had a specific visit to make. He'd thought about it on the walk back. Who in this castle would give him honest information rather than managed information? The list was shorter than it should have been for a school full of adults. He knocked on McGonagall's office door and she answered it in the precise 7 seconds that suggested she'd been at her desk and hadn't needed to cross the room. "Potter," she said, with the particular tone she used when she was recalibrating. She looked at him the way everyone kept looking at him, the different double take. "Did you need something?" "I have a couple of questions, Professor." He paused. "Academic ones." She opened the door wider in a gesture that was invitation and skepticism simultaneously, and he went in and sat in the chair across from her desk, and she sat behind it, and Harry had a sudden clear understanding of why everyone found McGonagall easier to respect than most of the staff. She was entirely what she appeared. Every part of her was exactly as advertised. There was something deeply restful about that. "The Triwizard Tournament rules," Harry said. "Specifically the rules around what champions are and aren't permitted to prepare." McGonagall's eyes sharpened slightly. "Not suspicious, interested. Go on." "There's no rule against seeking independent study resources outside of normal curriculum." "Correct. The tournament regulations specify that champions must complete tasks without prohibited magical assistance during the tasks themselves. Preparation is unregulated. And there's no rule against collaborative discussion between champions about general magical theory." "Also correct, though there is a reasonable expectation that champions not share specific task information if they have come by it prematurely." A pause. "Are you planning to share specific task information prematurely?" "No. I'm planning to have a series of conversations about advanced magical theory with someone who finds the tournament as ethically complicated as I do." He met her eyes. "Just so you know." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was one he'd never seen her direct at him before, not stern, not worried, not the cautious affection she channeled through discipline. More like the look of someone watching something happen that they'd wondered about for a long time. "The student records held in this office," Harry said. "The magical activity logs." Her expression very slightly shifted. "Those are not generally available to students." "I know. I'm asking about the availability criteria. Specifically whether a student can request to view their own record." McGonagall was still. Not the stillness of a person thinking, the stillness of a person who is very carefully managing their response because the response they want to give is not the one the situation requires them to give. Harry watched this happening and felt it confirm something. "Technically," she said, after 6 full seconds, "a student may request to review records pertaining to their own magical development under Provision 14 of the Hogwarts Student Charter." A beat. "This provision is almost never invoked. But it exists. It exists." She held his eyes. "Potter, Harry." The first name, which she almost never used. "Before you pursue certain lines of investigation. I want you to understand that some of the things you might find, some of the decisions that were made about your situation, were made by people who believed, genuinely, that they were protecting you." "I know," Harry said. She seemed surprised by that. "That's what makes it more complicated, not less," he said. "Someone who means you harm and hurts you is one kind of problem. Someone who loves you and controls you completely for your own good is a different kind of problem, and I think it's actually harder to be angry about, which is probably part of why it works so well." McGonagall was entirely still. Her hands, flat on her desk, pressed down slightly. "I'm not going to do anything rash," Harry said, again, because it was true and because people seemed to need to hear it. "I just need accurate information. I'm 14 and someone has been making very large decisions about my life without telling me, and I would like to start being involved in those decisions." A pause. "I think that's reasonable." "It is," she said. Very quietly. "I'll have Provision 14 paperwork on my desk by tomorrow morning." Harry stood. He picked up his bag. "Thank you, Professor Potter." He stopped at the door. She was looking at him with that same strange, watching expression. "For what it's worth, and I recognize this is inadequate, I am sorry for the things I knew and did not say." Harry looked at her. "Tell me them," he said. "When you're ready. I'd rather have late honesty than permanent silence." He left the office and walked back into the corridor and stood there for a moment in the quiet of a school that was mostly on holiday. His magic sat warm and steady inside him. The bond sat warm and steady in his chest. He thought about McGonagall's face when he described loving control versus harmful control, and the way her hands had pressed flat against the desk, and wondered how long she'd been holding that particular weight. He went to find Ron and Hermione, because whatever came next, he wasn't going to navigate it alone. That was new too, choosing to involve the people he trusted rather than protecting them from what he was dealing with. He had done that for 3 years and all it had produced was moments where they arrived anyway, and he was grateful and guilty simultaneously, which was exhausting and unnecessary. He found them in the Gryffindor common room. Ron was playing chess with himself, which was never a good sign for Ron's emotional state, because he always won and it didn't satisfy him at all. Hermione had 4 books open on the table in front of her and was cross-referencing them with the focused pleasure of someone in their natural environment. Harry sat down. They both looked at him. "I need to tell you both something," he said. "All of it. I want you to hear the whole thing before you ask questions, because I know once you know part of it you'll want to respond to the part, and I'd rather you respond to the whole." Ron's chess pieces turned toward Harry with interest. Hermione closed 3 of her 4 books. "All right," she said. Harry told them. He started with the moment at the ball, the pressure, the crack, the 43, and moved through what Fleur had explained, what the book confirmed, what he'd felt in his own magic, what McGonagall had said. He told it the way he was trying to do everything now, clearly, directly, without softening the parts that were hardest or dramatizing the parts that felt significant. When he finished, the common room was quiet. A log settled in the fire. Ron's chess knight had its head tilted in what was, for a chess piece, an extremely attentive posture. Hermione spoke first. 11 deliberate blocks. Her voice was the controlled monotone of someone running very hot on the inside. Placed by someone skilled enough to disguise them as ambient suppression. Yes. And the most recent was 18 months ago. Fleur's read on it was within the last 18 months, yes. Hermione looked at the fire for a moment. Then she stood up, walked to her bag, pulled out a fresh piece of parchment, sat back down, and began writing in a fast, organized column, not a panic list but a methodology. She wrote for about 2 minutes while Harry and Ron watched. Then she put the quill down and looked at the list. 6 things we need before we do anything, she said. 1. Your own magical records under Provision 14, which you already have in motion. 2. A diagnostic scan by someone who can distinguish placed blocks from environmental ones and whose loyalty is not to the person we're thinking about. 3. Independent verification of Fleur's read on the timing. 4. Legal standing. If deliberate blocks have been placed on a minor without guardianship consent, there are laws about this, and I need to find them. 5. We need serious. 6. She paused. 6. We need to be very careful about how this comes out, because if we go at this wrong, the person responsible controls enough of the narrative that we could be made to look like we're acting from misplaced adolescent rebellion. Ron had gone very still during all of this. His chess knight had laid down, apparently overwhelmed. Harry, Ron said. If it's who we're both thinking, he stopped. Tried again. You're all right. With all of it? I'm all right, Harry said. Because Ron picked up a bishop, set it down, looked at Harry with an expression that had shed all its earlier complicated edges and was simply open, simply worried, the way Ron looked when it was just the 2 of them and the world had stripped away everything else. This is properly awful, mate. I know. Harry felt the warmth of it, the uncomplicated way Ron could arrive at someone's side when it mattered. But I feel better than I have in years. Which is strange, probably. Not strange, Hermione said, without looking up from her list. You spent years carrying suppressed power and calling the strain of it normal. Of course you feel better with it removed. She paused. I want to be very furious about this for a while. Is that all right? Please, Harry said. One of us should be. She made a small, precise, controlled sound that was as close to a curse word as Hermione Granger came in daylight hours, and returned to her list with the energy of someone about to do something about something, which Harry found deeply comforting. Outside, the December afternoon was tilting toward an early dark, and inside the Gryffindor common room 3 14-year-olds were making the kind of plans that the very powerful adults in the castle above them would have found deeply inconvenient if they'd known about them. Which they didn't. Yet. Across the castle, in the enchanted warmth of the Beauxbatons carriage, Fleur Delacour sat at her desk and wrote a letter in French to her grandmother, not her mother, who was loving and would panic, but her grandmother, who was the oldest living full-blooded Veela in Western Europe and who had once told Fleur that if the mate bond ever activated, the first thing to do was tell someone who wouldn't be impressed by it. Her grandmother was not impressed by anything. It was her best quality. Grandmere, the letter began. Something has happened that I need to explain. I need information about the bond's legal protections under French wizarding law, and I need it quickly. I also need your opinion on a situation involving deliberate magical interference with a bonded individual's soul, because I believe this falls under protections I am not fully familiar with. And I need you to not tell Maman until I have figured out what I am doing. She sealed it and sent it with her school owl and then sat back and thought about a boy sitting cross-legged on a cold rock at 6:30 in the morning, reading The Lake, telling her things directly, bringing her rock cakes that were structural engineering projects. The bond sat in her chest, warm and present, and for the first time since it had activated, she let herself not fight it. Just for a moment. Just to know what it felt like without the resistance. It felt, she thought, like finally standing somewhere steady. She picked up her wand and went back to studying for the second task, because the bond was one thing and the tournament was another, and she had never in her life failed to be excellent at both the things that mattered to her heart and the things that required her mind. She was not about to start. Chapter 3, The weight of a name. The Provision 14 paperwork was on McGonagall's desk when Harry arrived at 7:45 in the morning. She handed it to him without comment, except to say that he would need to submit it through the school registrar, who kept office hours between 9 and 11, and that the record's retrieval typically took 3 to 5 working days. Harry thanked her, noted that Christmas Day fell within the 3 to 5 day window, and asked whether the registrar would be on site over the holiday. McGonagall looked at him over her spectacles. I will personally expedite the request, she said, in the tone of someone who has decided a thing and means it completely. Harry submitted the paperwork at 9 and went to breakfast. The castle had settled into its Christmas configuration, most students gone, the remaining ones spread thin across the common rooms with a pleasant lack of social pressure. The Great Hall felt twice its normal size with half its normal population. Garlands of enchanted holly rotated slowly above the emptied tables. The ceiling showed a heavy sky the color of pewter, the kind that promised snow it hadn't yet delivered. Hermione had the legal text spread across the table before he arrived. She'd started on them last night and had clearly been at it since before he woke, because there were 3 inches of handwritten notes beside the books and the ink on the top sheet was still wet. French wizarding law is different from British wizarding law in some important ways, she said, by way of greeting. But they both ratified the International Confederation's Charter on Magical Persons in 1920, and Article 19 is very clear. Deliberate magical interference with the sole architecture of a minor without documented consent from a legal guardian is classified as, she checked her notes, undue magical restriction, which is a Category A violation. Category A means criminal prosecution, not just ministry censure. Ron poured himself pumpkin juice. So if someone placed those blocks on Harry deliberately, they committed a crime. Yes. She looked at Harry. The challenge is proof. The blocks are gone now. Fleur's testimony about what she perceived is evidence, but it's indirect. What we need is either a skilled enough magical examiner who can read the residual signatures, blocks leave traces even after removal, apparently, like scar tissue, or documentation of the initial placement. Where would documentation exist? Harry asked. That's the question, isn't it? She tapped her quill against the parchment. Healers at St. Mungo's are required to log any soul-level magical work. But if the procedure wasn't performed at St. Mungo's, it wasn't, Harry said. He was certain of this in the way he was certain of everything now, not with arrogance, but with the precision of a person working from accurate information rather than filtered approximations. It was done here. In this castle. At least the school year ones. Then the Hogwarts magical activity log. Which McGonagall is getting me access to. Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when a plan was coming together faster than she'd anticipated. You're moving quickly. Is that a problem? No. She paused. I just want to make sure we're building something solid. If we move too fast and miss something, the person we're building it against will find the gaps before we do. I know. Harry reached for the toast. That's why I'm doing the legal work first. Evidence before confrontation. Ron was eating with a kind of subdued focus that Harry recognized. He was processing, which for Ron looked outwardly like pure appetite but was actually a high-functioning parallel mental track. He swallowed, set his fork down. Sirius, he said. Have you written to him? I wrote last night. He'll respond through the fireplace in the Gryffindor common room when he can. He's been moving around a lot. Harry paused. He needs to know. If there's going to be any kind of formal complaint or legal action, he's my godfather. That makes him my magical guardian. He was never declared your legal guardian, Hermione said carefully. He was never tried, either. He's innocent. The legal situation is correctable. Harry said it the way he said everything now, as a fact to be dealt with, rather than a grievance to be survived. One thing at a time. The snow the pewter sky had been promising arrived mid-morning, falling in the thick, deliberate way of serious December snow rather than the performative flurry. By noon the grounds were 6 inches deep in it and the remaining students had organized a loose, cheerful war near the Quidditch pitch that Harry could see from the library window. He was back in the restricted section. Different book this time. A slender volume called Veela and the Ancient Bonds, a cross-cultural examination, which Madame Pants had retrieved from behind the restricted section with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific request for 40 years and was irritated it had taken this long. The book was old. The kind of old where the pages have aged to the color of tea and the ink has taken on a quality of conviction, as if the words believe themselves more firmly than modern print. Harry read it with the careful attention it deserved. The mate bond, the book explained, was not a wizarding construct. It predated wizarding magic entirely, running deeper than spells or learned skill, belonging to the same category of ancient deep magic as Fawkes's Phoenix Fire or the protective sacrifice Lily Potter had made 13 years ago, the kind of magic that runs beneath everything else and occasionally surfaces in ways that reorganize the world around it. What Harry hadn't known, what the book made very clear, was that the bond had legal standing. Ancient legal standing. Under the statutes formalized in 1612 by the International Confederation's forerunners, a recognized mate bond between a Veela and their chosen created a set of mutual protections under magical law. The chosen was entitled to full knowledge of any magical interference with their person. Any party who had interfered with the chosen's magical development was legally obligated to answer for it before a Veela tribal council, which operated entirely independently of ministry authority. A Veela tribal council, Harry noted, that the British Ministry of Magic had precisely zero jurisdiction over. He sat with that for a moment. Then he copied nothing down, because he was committed to accurate memory and also because what he'd read was either a weapon or a lever depending on how it was used, and he needed to think carefully about which. He was still thinking when a shadow fell across his table and he looked up and found Professor Moody standing at the end of the restricted section aisle. Not the real Moody. Harry knew this the way he knew his own magic, with certainty that didn't require explanation. He'd known something was wrong with Moody since September, in the way you know a note is off-key even if you can't name the key it should be in. Before last night, he'd filed it under something to worry about later. Now, with his perception operating at full capacity, the wrongness of the man standing at the end of the aisle was loud. The magical signature was off. Underneath the scarred face and the distinctive eye and the clunking gait, there was someone else. Someone Harry's unblocked magic recognized the way a dog recognizes a smell, not the face but the pattern of the person beneath. He'd met that pattern once. In a diary. In a memory of a teenage boy who had grown up to be Lord Voldemort, and whose particular flavor of magic had a quality Harry could now identify as precisely as a fingerprint. This wasn't Voldemort himself. But it was someone whose magic had been so steeped in proximity to Voldemort, for so long, that the resonance had soaked in. A very senior Death Eater, or someone who had been in sustained close contact with Voldemort's resurgent form. Harry closed his book and looked at Moody, who wasn't Moody, with the easy directness of someone who is not pretending not to know what they know. "Lost, Professor," he said. The magical eye rotated. The real one narrowed. "Didn't expect to find you in here." "I like reading," Harry said. "Particularly when people are trying to make sure I don't have time to." A pause that had texture. Big statement. "I'm full of them lately." Harry stood, tucked the book under his arm. "Was there something you needed, or did you just want to know what I was reading?" Keeping an eye on the champions, Moody said, with the bluff easiness of the performance he'd been running all year. "Tournament regulations. Making sure no one's getting prohibited assistance." Reading very old books about Veela culture isn't prohibited assistance. Harry stepped out of the aisle and walked toward the library exit, which required passing close to Moody, which he did without breaking stride or looking away. "But thanks for checking." He felt the magical eye following him out. He felt the particular quality of the attention behind it, assessing, recalculating, filing new information under a category that hadn't existed yesterday. Whoever was behind that face had expected Harry Potter to be the person he'd been before the Yule Ball, and had just discovered he wasn't. Harry walked out of the library, turned a corner, pressed his back against the stone wall, and let his magic extend quietly outward, not an active spell, just awareness, the way you extend your hearing when you suspect something behind you. He felt Moody, who wasn't Moody, stand in the library entrance for approximately 20 seconds. Then move away, in the direction of the dungeons. Harry pulled out the small piece of parchment he always kept in his pocket for Quidditch plays, wrote Moody, not Moody, connected to V, went to dungeons, Christmas Eve afternoon, folded it, and put it back in his pocket. Then he went to find Fleur, because he'd just added a significant new variable to the situation and she needed to know about it. She was in the Beauxbatons carriage when he knocked, or not knocked exactly, because the carriage had a bell pull, which he hadn't expected, and operated it with the slight awkwardness of someone encountering a new piece of technology. One of the other Beauxbatons girls answered and regarded him with the bright, assessing attention that seemed to be a school-wide characteristic. "Harry Potter," she said. "Fleur." The last word was projected back into the carriage with impressive volume for someone who'd spoken his name so lightly. Fleur appeared at the carriage door in a winter robe he hadn't seen before, still holding a quill, which she capped with practiced efficiency. She looked at his face and her expression sharpened immediately. "What happened?" "Moody followed me to the restricted section." "Moody is not Moody." She stepped down from the carriage. The Beauxbatons girl looked between them with frank curiosity. Fleur said something quick in French and the girl retreated and the carriage door closed. "Explain," Fleur said. Harry explained. He told her what he'd felt, the wrong magical signature, the Voldemort resonance underneath, the directional movement toward the dungeons. He was concise and specific, and she listened without interrupting, which he'd come to understand was her natural mode when the information mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then, "How certain are you?" "Completely." Because of the blocks being removed. Because of the blocks being removed, he confirmed. Before last night, I might have felt it as vague unease and not been able to name it. Now I can name it precisely. He paused. The tournament. Someone entered my name, someone inside the castle, with access to the goblet, with the skill to get past Dumbledore's age line. If Moody is being impersonated by a Death Eater, then the tournament itself is a mechanism, Fleur said. She said it not like a conclusion but like something she'd suspected and was now confirming. The tasks are not coincidental. Someone designed them specifically. For me to get through them and arrive somewhere specific, Harry said. The third task. Whatever it leads to. Fleur looked at him. You've been thinking about this since last night. I've been thinking about everything more clearly since last night. He rubbed the back of his neck. The problem is I don't know enough about the specific trap to avoid it without tipping off whoever is watching that I know it's a trap. If I refuse to participate, they have other mechanisms. If I participate but try to survive it openly, they adapt. So you participate, Fleur said. But not blindly. And I make sure I'm not alone when I arrive wherever it leads. He looked at her steadily. Which means you need to know. And Hermione. And Sirius. She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet there was something he recognized as her processing not just the information but the shape of what he was doing, the instinct to share the weight rather than carry it alone. Her eyes were doing something complicated. You trust me with this. You're he stopped. Chose the word carefully. You're in this with me. The bond is real whether we label it or not. Someone is trying to use me. They'll use anything around me if they can. You need to know so you can protect yourself. I am quite capable of protecting myself, she said, with the brisk precision of someone correcting a small error. I know. I'm not suggesting otherwise. Harry held her gaze. I'm saying I want you to have the information because you deserve it. Not because I'm assigning you a role in someone else's plan. The complicated thing in her eyes settled. She looked at him with the private version of her expression, the one he'd started to be able to read, slightly. All right, she said. What do we need? I need to identify who Moody actually is. There are two ways. Polyjuice potion has a duration limit, so if I can force an interruption in the supply chain, he paused, no, too risky without backup. The other way is to find the real Moody. If someone is impersonating him long-term, the real one is somewhere close, because the impersonator needs access to him for continued polyjuice supply. Fleur thought about this. The castle grounds. Or beneath them. He glanced toward the castle. There are places in this castle nobody explores because nobody has a reason to. The 7th floor. The dungeons below the dungeons. He paused. I have a map. She looked at him. You have a map of this castle. I have a map of this castle, he confirmed. She made the small French sound that translated roughly to of course you do, and they went inside. The Marauder's map, unfolded on the Gryffindor common room table with Hermione and Ron peering at it, was as detailed and alive as ever. Harry watched the names and footprints moving across it, the remaining students scattered through the castle, Professor Flitwick doing something in his office, Peeves performing what appeared to be an unsupervised tour of the trophy room. Fleur sat across the table, her first time in Gryffindor Tower, looking at the map with the composed curiosity of someone encountering impressive magic and giving it the credit it deserves. It shows everyone, she said. Everyone with a physical presence in the castle, Harry confirmed. Including, he found Moody's dot, moving through the 3rd floor corridor, Mad-Eye Moody, who is currently near the defense classroom. He paused. And also, he scanned the map, found nothing, scanned again, not currently showing anyone imprisoned anywhere in the castle. Which means either the real Moody is being kept somewhere the map doesn't cover, Hermione said. Or somewhere outside the castle but on the grounds, Ron said. The Whomping Willow, the groundskeeper's hut, he stopped. His eyes went wide. Harry was already looking at the same spot on the map. There was a small, easily overlooked dot moving in a tiny, repetitive circle in the area of the map that corresponded to the ground floor of a building Harry hadn't paid much attention to since his 3rd year. The dot's name was printed in the map's spidery handwriting. Alastair Moody. The dot was in the groundskeeper's hut. Hagrid's, Ron said. Not Hagrid's hut, Harry said, studying the position. Close to it. The area around the back, near where Buckbeak was chained up in 3rd year. He looked up. There's an old storage building attached to Hagrid's, barely more than a shed. I passed it 100 times and never looked properly at it. Because you weren't meant to, Hermione said. She had already stood up. We need to go now, while the impersonator is on the 3rd floor. Fleur was on her feet before Hermione finished the sentence. Harry looked at Ron. Ron was already reaching for his jacket. 4 of us, Ron said. You, me, Hermione, and, he glanced at Fleur with the complicated residue of his earlier feelings, and then something in his face made a decision. Fleur, can you do anything about wards? The shed's probably warded. Ward breaking is a French specialty, Fleur said, without any smugness at all, simply as information. Right then, Ron said, and the 4 of them went down the stairs. The snow had stopped but left a deep, clean silence over the grounds. Their footprints would be visible on the walk back, Harry noted, a problem they'd deal with after the more pressing one. The cold was absolute, the kind that makes your breath loud in your own ears. Hagrid's hut was dark, which meant Hagrid was still at the castle. He usually stayed for dinner with the remaining students on Christmas Eve and could be reliably counted on to be involved in any situation that involved festivity and food. The hut loomed in the low winter light, and behind it, slightly to the east, a structure Harry had registered as background detail for 3 years resolved now into something that mattered. It was barely 4 feet wide and 8 feet long, built from the same stone as Hagrid's chimney, with a door that was old wood reinforced with iron bands and covered in layered protective charms that Fleur began reading before they reached it. 3 wards, she said quietly, hands moving through the air in front of the door. A detection ward, anyone who touches the door without the countercharm triggers it. A memory charm layered into the approach, which is why none of us looked twice at this place for 4 years. And a containment ward that prevents magical communication from inside. She paused. Sophisticated. Someone spent real time on this. Can you remove them? Harry asked. Give me 90 seconds, she said, and began. Watching Fleur work magic was something Harry had not done before, and it stopped him, not in an inappropriate way, but in the way of recognizing mastery. She worked with the precise, unhurried efficiency of someone who has done a great deal more than her age suggests, her wand movements small and exact, the incantations barely above breath. The detection ward dissolved first, then the memory charm, which produced a peculiar sensation in Harry's head, a small click, like a room lighting up that he hadn't known was dark. The containment ward she unwound last, and more carefully, because it was layered 3 ways. When it came down, the night was very still. Hermione unlocked the door. Inside, in the absolute darkness of the shielded space, Mad-Eye Moody was unconscious in a magical containment chest that had been shrunk to accommodate the small room. The chest was locked. He was alive, his chest moved, his magical signature was present and distinctive, nothing like the impersonator's. He looked terrible, gaunt, pale, the magical eye still, which was eerie in a way Harry hadn't expected. He's been here since September at minimum, Hermione said, crouching beside the chest. The spell work on the containment is months old. She was already working on the lock. Fleur had a diagnostic spell running before Hermione had the chest fully open, a complex, layered charm that Harry didn't recognize, which produced a faint silver light that moved over Moody's body in slow, assessing waves. He is physically stable. Maintained by stasis magic. He will not recover fully without St. Mungo's, but he is in no immediate danger. She withdrew the diagnostic charm. He can be moved. We can't take him to the hospital wing, Harry said. The impersonator will know. Madame Pomfrey, Ron said. She keeps quarters separate from the hospital wing. If we bring him in after dark, through the side entrance, she's loyal to Dumbledore, Harry said. She's loyal to patients, Ron said, firmly. I've seen her fight Dumbledore over students' medical treatment twice. She has opinions about who has authority over bodies in her care, and the answer is her. Harry thought about this and decided Ron was right. We need to move quickly then. And quietly. And we need to handle the impersonator before he realizes Moody's location has been compromised. He looked at the four of them. We can't take him down tonight, we don't have enough legal standing yet. But we can do something about the polyjuice supply, because if the impersonator can't maintain the transformation, the situation resolves itself. The dungeon, Fleur said. You said the false Moody went toward the dungeons. That is where the polyjuice is being brewed, almost certainly. The dungeons are the most magically stable environment in the castle for extended potion work. So we remove the polyjuice, Hermione said, with the bright-eyed efficiency of someone who has identified the load-bearing element of a complex structure. The transformation expires, Moody's real face reappears, and Dumbledore has to deal with the fact that a Death Eater has been sitting on his staff all year. Harry looked at her. Do you know where it would be, specifically? Snape's private stores, she said, with the certainty of someone who has spent 4 years thinking like a detective inside this building. If I were going to brew long-term polyjuice somewhere in this castle without Dumbledore's knowledge, I would use Snape's stores. The ambient potion fumes in that area mask foreign potions almost perfectly. Snape's own preservation wards are so strong that a second potion hidden inside the area would be invisible to casual examination. Can we get in? She held up a small vial. I have a passkey. I borrowed it from Professor Slughorn's records on potion supply chains during my first year and never gave it back. Ron stared at her. You've had an unauthorized master key to the Hogwarts potion stores since first year. I prefer to think of it as an undisclosed resource. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. They had simultaneously identical expressions of profound, affectionate resignation. Right, Harry said. Fleur and Ron, get Moody to Madame Pomfrey. Hermione and I will handle the stores. I don't love us splitting up, Ron said. We're better split than all four going one place, Harry said. Fleur can handle anything that comes at you between here and Pomfrey's quarters. Ron looked at Fleur. Some of the residual complicated expression surfaced briefly and then dissolved into something simpler. Can you? Fleur looked at him with the particular patience of someone deciding whether to be offended and choosing not to be. I placed in the Triwizard Tournament, she said. I believe I can manage a corridor. Ron nodded. Yeah. Fair enough. He bent to help lift Moody's unconscious form, and the small, graceless, essential act of two people with complicated feelings about each other cooperating anyway was one of the more quietly important moments of the evening. Harry watched them go and then turned to Hermione. Dungeons, he said. Dungeons, she agreed. They found it in 18 minutes. Hermione's passkey worked, Snape's preservation wards yielded to a second-year unlocking charm applied with the right angular approach. Hermione had apparently spent a significant portion of second year figuring this out for reasons she described as academically motivated, and behind a false panel in the third storage shelf, in a rack of 6 identical vials, was a large batch of polyjuice potion in a distinctive thick, muddied appearance of long-term use. Harry took all 6 vials. Hermione replaced them with an identical-looking batch of inert-colored water that she produced from her bag with the preparedness of someone who packs for contingencies as a spiritual practice. He won't know until he tries to use it, she said, capping the replacement vials. Which will be tomorrow morning, I think, Harry said. Whoever he is, he'll have a morning routine for it. So by tomorrow morning, the false Moody is himself again. Hermione stood and brushed her robes. And has to make a decision, reveal himself, run, or stay and bluff. He'll try to bluff first, Harry said. He'll find a reason to be absent for the day, try to get more polyjuice. He doesn't know we've found Moody. He paused. Which gives us maybe 12 hours to get the right people in place. Hermione looked at him. Dumbledore. Yes. This forces your hand with him. I know. Harry looked at the 6 vials in his hand. But the Moody situation is separate from the Blocks situation. Moody being imprisoned is something Dumbledore should answer for regardless of everything else. Either he didn't know, in which case his intelligence network has a catastrophic hole in it, or he did know, which would mean he knowingly employed a Death Eater to watch over you, Hermione said quietly. Which would add a layer to the question of why someone has been managing me very carefully for 14 years. Harry put the vials in his own bag. I'm not accusing him of that. Not yet. But it's a question I need an answer to, and the Moody situation gives me a reason to ask it that isn't about the Blocks. One thing at a time. Hermione was quiet as they moved back through the dungeons, the carefully maintained quiet of someone organizing their response. When they reached the stairs, she said, "He cares about you." I want to be clear that I believe that. I believe it too, Harry said. It doesn't make it better. No, Harry agreed. It makes it more complicated, which is not better. Madame Pomfrey accepted the situation with the brisk, infuriated competence of someone who had been practicing medicine in this castle for 30 years and had run out of capacity for surprise. She assessed Moody, cast 3 rapid diagnostic spells, issued a sequence of stabilizing charms, and turned to the 4 of them with the expression of someone who intends to have a longer conversation about this and is choosing the moment carefully. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Yes." "This man has been imprisoned for months. He requires immediate further care and the person responsible requires immediate arrest." She said this like a medical prescription. "Who knows about this besides the 4 of you?" "Nobody yet," Harry said. "By morning it will need to be Dumbledore." "But tonight I am treating my patient," she said. "And you are going to bed. All of you." Her eyes moved over them with clinical efficiency. "You're all freezing, Miss Delacour has minor ward burn on both hands, and Mr. Weasley has been moving in the bent-forward posture of someone nursing a pulled shoulder for the last 10 minutes. Ron straightened instinctively. "It's fine." "It's not, sit down." She pointed. Ron sat with the reflexive compliance of someone who has been spoken to by Madame Pomfrey before and has learned the relevant lessons. An hour later, warmed and treated and with the peculiar adrenaline of a significant evening settling into exhaustion, the 4 of them sat in Madame Pomfrey's small waiting area. The healer was behind the curtained section with Moody, the sounds of active medical magic muffled but present. Ron had his head back against the wall and his eyes closed. Hermione had produced a notebook from somewhere and was writing notes with the focused calm of someone converting experience into action items. Fleur sat beside Harry, close enough that the warmth of the bond between them was a steady, present thing. She was looking at the curtained area with a thoughtful expression. "You knew something was wrong with Moody," she said quietly. "Since before last night." "I had a feeling," Harry said. "Now I have a full understanding of it, which is different. And the tournament is a trap." "The tournament is a trap." She was quiet. "Then, I am in it too." "I know." "If the 3rd task leads to Voldemort," she said the name without flinching, which he noted with appreciation, "then every champion who enters is potentially in danger, not only you." "Yes," Harry said. "Which is why I need to know what the 3rd task is before we get there. Not after." She turned to look at him. "The false Moody knows what the task is. He helped design it." "He did." Harry paused. "And by tomorrow morning he's going to be sitting in his office as his real self, trying to figure out what happened to his polyjuice supply and whether he's been discovered. He'll be off balance." He looked at her. "That's an opportunity." Fleur held his gaze for a moment. In the tired, warm quiet of the waiting room, with the castle standing over them full of its centuries and its complicated loyalties and its secrets, she looked at him with an expression that had moved past the careful calibrated versions into something simpler and more truthful. "I thought," she said, when the bond activated, "that the difficult part would be managing the feeling of it. I did not anticipate that the feeling would be the easiest part." "Is it easy?" Harry asked. He meant it genuinely. "Easier than I expected." She looked down at her hands. The wart burn that Pomfrey had treated was already fading. "You are difficult to love badly," she said. "Most people, you love them and it requires constant maintenance, adjusting how you present yourself, managing their expectations, being careful about what you say and how. With you it requires," she paused for the precise word, "attention. Simply paying attention. That is all." Harry sat with that for a long moment. He was 14, and some vocabulary for what he was experiencing was genuinely not fully formed yet, but he understood the core of what she was saying, because it was true in the reverse direction too. He had never spent time with Fleur managing the interaction. He'd spent time with her paying attention to it. "My grandmother wrote back," Fleur said. The letter was 2 pages and extremely direct. "What did she say?" "That if my chosen has had his soul interfered with, the Veela Council has jurisdiction to compel testimony from any individual responsible. That this jurisdiction predates the British ministry by approximately 600 years. She paused. "And that I should bring you to meet her at the earliest opportunity, which from my grandmother is the highest possible form of endorsement." Harry thought about standing before a Veela tribal council. He thought about Dumbledore being compelled to testify before a body he had no authority over. He thought about the specific, clean satisfaction of finding the right lever for the right door. "Your grandmother sounds excellent," he said. "She is terrifying," Fleur said, "and I mean that entirely as a compliment." From behind the curtain, Madame Pomfrey's voice issued a sharp command in medical Latin. They all straightened reflexively. Then she came through the curtain and looked at them. "He will recover," she said. "It will take time but the prognosis is good." She looked at Harry specifically. "Mr. Potter. In the morning, when you speak to the headmaster, I want to be in that room." "Yes," Harry said. "I was going to ask." She nodded, the decisive nod of someone who has made a decision and considers it settled. "Go to bed. All of you." They stood. Ron's shoulder cracked as he straightened and he hissed. Hermione closed her notebook. Fleur smoothed her winter robe. Harry shouldered his bag and felt the weight of 6 vials of Polyjuice potion, a marauder's map with a freed named Alastair Moody, the beginning of a legal case, and a Veela grandmother's endorsement. He also felt, quite clearly, that the weight was manageable. That it was, in fact, considerably less than what he'd been carrying for 14 years already. 43 walls worth of suppressed living, compressed into the narrow space of a boy who'd been told, in every way except direct language, to take up less room. He was done with less room. Outside Madame Pomfrey's door, Fleur stopped. She looked at him. Something had come to a decision behind her silver eyes. "The walk tomorrow," she said. 7:30. 6:30, Harry said. She looked at him with the private version of the smile, the real one. 6:30, she agreed. She went toward the Beauxbatons carriage. Harry, Ron, and Hermione went toward Gryffindor Tower, and the castle held its Christmas Eve silence around them, and somewhere in its depths a man who had spent months wearing another man's face was about to discover that the carefully constructed plan he'd been managing all year had just developed a very significant flaw. In his high office with its twinkling instruments, Dumbledore sat awake. The instruments had been behaving strangely all day. 3 of them had altered their readings overnight, small changes, subtle, the kind that a less attentive observer would have attributed to seasonal magical fluctuation. But Dumbledore had built these instruments specifically to monitor Harry Potter's magical condition, and what they were showing him now was not fluctuation. It was a new baseline. A permanent one. He had, in his very long life, made many difficult decisions. Most of them he stood by. Some of them kept him awake. Tonight, for the first time in a very long time, he was not certain that his next decision was clear. The boy he had planned for, carefully and lovingly and with absolute conviction, was no longer the boy downstairs. The boy downstairs was someone Dumbledore had always known existed and had spent 14 years ensuring did not yet fully emerge. He was emerged. Dumbledore put down the instrument in his hand. He looked at his portraits, the former headmasters sleeping in their frames, most of them, Phineas Nigellus watching from behind apparently closed eyes. He thought about what he was going to say tomorrow morning, when Harry Potter walked through his door and asked questions that deserved answers. He thought about the greater good. He thought about the boy's mother, who had trusted him. He thought about the boy's father, who would not have. He thought about what it meant that he was afraid, at 70-something years old, of a 14-year-old's questions. He thought about what that fear indicated about the questions. He turned back to his desk, and in the deep quiet of Christmas Eve, Albus Dumbledore began, for the first time, to think about what the truth would cost rather than what the lie was worth. Chapter 4, Fire Answers Fire. The morning of Christmas Day broke cold and absolutely clear, the kind of winter morning that makes the world look like it was made last night and hasn't been used yet. Harry was at the lake at 6:15. The snow from 2 days ago had hardened into a crisp crust that cracked cleanly under his boots, and the sound of it was satisfying in a way he couldn't have explained. He stood at the water's edge and did what he'd been doing every morning since the Yule Ball, felt his magic. It had become a kind of daily calibration, the way musicians tune before playing. Not because it required conscious maintenance but because knowing the instrument precisely made everything that came after more accurate. This morning it felt sharper than yesterday, which had felt sharper than the day before. As if removal of the blocks hadn't been a single event but the beginning of a gradual opening, a flower that was still in the process of deciding how wide it was going to go. Very wide, Harry suspected. Possibly wider than anyone had planned for. Fleur arrived at 6:22, carrying 2 cups of something hot, which she'd clearly obtained from the Beauxbatons' carriage kitchen. She handed one to Harry without ceremony and stood beside him looking at the lake. Steam rose from both cups into the cold air. "Chocolate," she said. "French. Don't compare it to what they serve in the castle or you will be disappointed in the castle's version forever." Harry drank it. She was entirely correct and he said so. They stood in the comfortable quiet that had developed between them over the last 3 mornings, not silence born of having nothing to say but the specific peace of 2 people who have established enough honesty between them that they don't need to fill every moment with maintenance conversation. "Today," she said. "Today," Harry agreed. He felt the word land with the weight it deserved. Dumbledore's office. Bartemius Crouch Jr. Or whoever was under Moody's face, discovering his polyjuice had been compromised. The real Moody in Pomfrey's care. A cascade that was going to happen regardless of preference and needed to happen in the right order. "Your plan for Dumbledore," Fleur said. "Walk me through it." "I'm going to tell him about the blocks first. Not as an accusation, as information I've obtained, which requires his explanation. I want to see how he frames it before I show him what I know legally." He paused. "Then Moody. In that order, because the blocks are about me and the Moody situation is about the tournament, and I want him to understand I'm not conflating the two. Both are problems. Both require answers. But they're not the same problem and I'm not going to let him treat them as one." Fleur considered this. "You're giving him the opportunity to choose honesty." "Yes. And if he doesn't choose it?" Harry took a sip of the chocolate. "Then I know exactly where we stand, and I move to the legal options." He looked at the lake. The giant squid's shadow was near the surface today, moving slowly. "He's going to try to explain the blocks as protection. Necessary. For my own good. That's his framing for everything, and it's not wrong exactly, I do think he believes it. But believing you're protecting someone doesn't give you the right to do it by removing their ability to protect themselves." "The Veela Council jurisdiction," Fleur said quietly. You understand that invoking it makes this international. It takes it entirely outside British ministry control. I know. Dumbledore's influence within the British ministry is considerable. Outside it, she paused, considerably less. That's why it's the right lever, Harry said. He wasn't smug about it. He said it the way he said most things now, as a fact observed, not a victory savored. The bond gives you legal standing. Your grandmother's letter confirms the council's jurisdiction. That's not leverage I'm threatening him with today, it's a door I'm leaving open in case honesty doesn't work. She was looking at him sideways. You've thought about this very thoroughly. I slept 4 hours, he said. I thought about it the other 4. She made the small French sound. You should sleep more. Probably. He finished the chocolate. Are you all right? With all of it? Not the plan, you. She was quiet for a moment. When Fleur Delacour was quiet, it meant she was doing something real with the question rather than reaching for the socially adequate answer. He'd learned to wait for it. I am, she started. Stopped. Tried again. I came to Hogwarts for a competition. I came because I am good at magic and I wanted to prove it on an international stage, because at Beauxbatons there is no ceiling left for me to hit. She looked at the lake. I did not come to discover that a student in the same competition has been deliberately suppressed for years, that the tournament itself may be a mechanism for murder, and that my own deepest instinct had been building towards something for months without telling me. A pause. I am managing it. But I want you to understand that managing it is not the same as being comfortable. That's fair, Harry said. I am not asking for sympathy. I know. You're telling me the truth because we agreed to do that. He looked at her. I'm not comfortable either. I'm clear-headed and functional and in some ways better than I've been in years, but underneath that I'm also 14 and someone I've trusted since I was 11 has been putting walls inside my head. He said it without drama, with the clean acknowledgement of someone who has looked at a fact squarely and decided to carry it without being crushed by it. The anger is still sitting there. I'm going to feel it properly at some point. Just not today, because today I need to be precise. She looked at him with the expression that had stopped surprising him, the one that had warmth in it, settled and real. After today, she said, you are allowed to be 14 for a while. Noted, Harry said. I'll pencil it in. She laughed. It scattered across the frozen lake and the giant squid's shadow turned toward the sound, curious. They split at the castle gates. Fleur went to meet with her head of house, who had been informed vaguely that there were tournament-related matters to discuss and would be needed as witness. Harry went upstairs to collect Hermione, Ron, and Madame Pomfrey, in that order, and found all 3 of them already assembled in the hospital wing corridor when he arrived, which suggested either a shared organizational instinct or that Hermione had coordinated this before breakfast. He looked at Hermione. She had her notebook. She had her prepared legal citations. She was wearing the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific fight for several months and is finally about to have it. You organized this, Harry said. I sent notes, she said. 7 a.m. While you were at the lake. How did you know I was at the lake? Harry. She gave him the look. I have known about the morning lake meeting since the day after the Yule Ball. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Ron was in a jacket rather than his robes, which was technically a dress code violation but nobody was going to push it today. He looked more settled than he had in days, the kind of settled that comes from having done something concrete and consequential, which was Ron's natural medicine. He'd carried Moody across frozen grounds on Christmas Eve. He'd be fine. Madame Pomfrey had a sealed medical report in her hands. Harry suspected it contained diagnostics, treatment documentation, and a list of clinical grievances that would have been withering in any language. They went up to Dumbledore's office together. The gargoyle knew Harry's step by this point in 4 years and moved aside with the weary compliance of someone who has stopped being surprised. The spiral staircase carried them up. Harry knocked on the door. "Come in, Harry." He pushed the door open. The office was exactly as it always was, the instruments ticking, the portraits watching, Fawkes on his perch with his head turned toward the door at the sound of Harry's entry. The Phoenix's eyes held on Harry for a moment longer than usual and something moved in them. Harry didn't look away. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He looked as he always looked, ancient, benign, the specific quality of attention that made you feel briefly like the most important person in any room. He took in the group behind Harry with an expression that revealed almost nothing. Almost. Harry caught it, a flicker in the blue eyes when they moved from Harry to Pomfrey's medical report. The very slight adjustment of a man who had been managing a situation discovering the situation had developed in directions he hadn't managed. "A delegation," Dumbledore said. "Please, sit. All of you." They arranged themselves. Harry sat directly across from Dumbledore, which was where he always sat in this office, and did not feel, as he usually had, the particular pressure of being assessed and found wanting. He felt clear. He felt the entirety of himself, and it was more than this office was accustomed to. "I'd like to ask you about soul blocks," Harry said. The room was very quiet. The instruments ticked. One of the portrait subjects, a former headmistress Harry didn't know by name, opened her eyes very slightly. "A specific topic," Dumbledore said. His voice was exactly what it always was. Nothing betrayed in the voice. "I have 43 of them." "Had." Harry held the old man's gaze. "Environmental ones, which developed naturally. And 11 deliberate ones, placed with significant skill and maintained regularly. The most recent maintenance was within the last 18 months. He paused. "I'd like to know who placed them and why." Silence. The specific silence of a person deciding, in real time, what version of the truth they're going to offer. "Alastair Moody is in my hospital wing," Pomfrey said, because she had timed this precisely and Pomfrey's timing was always precise. "He has been imprisoned in a containment chest on the ground since September. He is recovering." She placed the medical report on the desk. "I thought you should know." Dumbledore's hands, flat on his desk, pressed down slightly. Harry watched it happen and recognized it, the same gesture McGonagall had made when he'd sat in her office. The gesture of a person bearing weight. "You found him," Dumbledore said. The "you" included everyone in the room but landed on Harry. "Christmas Eve," Harry said. "Groundskeeper's hut, back storage building." Fleur removed the wards. He paused. "Who has been teaching defense against the dark arts this year?" "I see." Dumbledore removed his half-moon spectacles, looked at them, replaced them. It was the only gesture of uncertainty Harry had ever seen from him. "These are significant discoveries." "They are," Harry agreed. "I'd like answers to both of them. In any order you prefer." Dumbledore looked at Harry across the desk. The blue eyes were clear and deep and absolutely sincere, which was the most complicated thing about this man. The sincerity was never performance. He believed everything he did. He was looking at Harry now with something that was genuinely, unmistakably grief. "The blocks," he said. "I placed 11 of them, yes." Ron made a sound. Hermione's hand on her notebook went white-knuckled. Pomfrey's expression did something controlled and severe. Harry said nothing. He let the admission be what it was. "I placed the first when you were 15 months old," Dumbledore continued. "The night I brought you to the Dursleys. You had already manifested, your mother's sacrifice had done something to your magical core that I had not anticipated, and what I saw in you that night, Harry, the scale of it," he paused. "I was afraid." "Of me," Harry said. "Not an accusation. A clarification. Of what would happen to you. What would be done to you, or by you, before you were ready. Voldemort's followers would have hunted a child displaying that level of raw power. The Ministry would have moved to control you. And you, Dumbledore looked at him with the specific sorrow of someone who has loved someone badly and knows it. You would have been shaped by that power before you had a self to be shaped from. I believed a childhood without walls around your magic would destroy you before you could become who you needed to be. Who you needed me to be, Harry said. A beat of silence. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. Both. The maintained blocks during school years. Harry didn't look away. What was that protecting me from? From arriving at your power before you were emotionally ready to use it without the violence that power at 14, unchecked, tends toward. Dumbledore met his eyes. You have seen what Tom Riddle did at your age, with his capabilities fully available to him. I'm not Tom Riddle, Harry said. The sentence had no heat in it at all. That was the thing about saying it now, it wasn't a defensive statement. It was simply true, and he knew it, and the knowing of it didn't require anyone else's validation. No, Dumbledore said. You are not. And I? He paused, and what happened in his expression was the closest thing to unguarded Harry had ever seen from him. I know, now, that the distinction I told myself I was protecting was never as uncertain as I made it. I told myself a story about necessity. I believed the story. He put his hands on the desk. I was wrong. The room held that word. Hermione was very still. Ron had the look of someone watching something they expected to make them furious, making them feel something more complicated. What happens to the impersonator? Harry said. Back to solid ground. Dumbledore appeared almost grateful for it. Bartemius Crouch Jr., he said. Yes. I should have known, the signs were there and he stopped. I was attending to other things. He knows what the third task is, Harry said. He designed it to lead somewhere specific. Somewhere Voldemort needs me to be. The maze, Dumbledore said. A magical maze on the Quidditch pitch. And the Triwizard Cup at the center, a portkey. Hermione's breath went sharp. Ron said something quiet and specific under his breath. To where? Harry said. A graveyard. Little Hangleton. Dumbledore's voice was level and very tired. Where Voldemort intends to perform a ritual using your blood to restore himself to full corporeal form. The instruments ticked. Fawkes made a low, musical sound, almost below hearing. Harry sat with the information and turned it over and felt its edges. And you knew this was his goal, Harry said. I suspected. I have been trying to prevent it reaching this stage. A pause. I had not anticipated the means he would use to get you there. Because you were busy managing me, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. In a sense. Yes. Harry stood. He looked around the room, at Hermione, who was writing something in her notebook with controlled intensity, at Ron, who was watching Harry with steady, uncomplicated loyalty, at Pomfrey, who looked like she was compiling a significant professional grievance with every passing second. Here is what is going to happen, Harry said. The calm in his voice was complete. Crouch Jr. will be restrained today, before he discovers his polyjuice is compromised. Moody will receive full care and the real defense curriculum will resume after Christmas. Sirius Black will be formally exonerated and declared my legal guardian, which I understand requires ministry involvement, and I expect the headmaster of Hogwarts to use his considerable influence to make that happen within the month. He paused. And the soul blocks will be documented, examined by an independent healer of my choice, and the records of their placement will be provided to me in full. Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that had no precedent in Harry's experience of the man. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't management. It was something closer to the look of a person seeing a resolution they had feared and also, quietly, hoped for. All of this, Harry said, I can request through standard channels. Or, if the standard channels prove insufficient, through the Veela Council, who have jurisdiction over interference with a bonded individual's soul that predates the British ministry by several centuries. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I would prefer the standard channels. I would prefer honesty and cooperation. But I want you to understand that I'm not asking as a student asking a headmaster. I'm asking as a person who has been managed since infancy and has decided he is done with it. Silence. Then Dumbledore said, "You sound like your father." "I'll take that," Harry said. A pause. Then, with the weight of someone setting down something they have carried for a very long time, "I will arrange everything you have asked for." Harry nodded. He turned toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Professor. I want to be clear about something." He turned back slightly. "What you did came from love. I know that. It doesn't change that it was wrong, but it changes how I'm choosing to move forward with it. I'm not going to destroy you or have you arrested or make this public unless you give me a reason to." He paused. "Give me honesty from here. That's all I'm asking for now." He left the office. The others filed out behind him. Hermione touched his arm briefly in the corridor, a quick, warm press of contact that communicated everything she wasn't going to say in a corridor. Ron clapped him once on the shoulder, solid and uncomplicated. They went downstairs. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was detained at 11:45 on Christmas morning, when Dumbledore walked into the defense office with Snape, McGonagall, and an Auror who had been flued from the Ministry's emergency contact line. The polyjuice had expired approximately an hour earlier and Crouch had been attempting to obscure the lack of transformation with a concealment charm that was sophisticated but not quite sophisticated enough for a room with Dumbledore in it. He went quietly, which surprised Harry when Dumbledore told him afterward. He'd expected rage, or grandstanding, or some last act of dramatic conviction. Instead Crouch had simply looked up at the people in the doorway and said, in a voice that was entirely his own and entirely hollow, "I knew it would be the boy that found it." Harry didn't find satisfaction in it. He filed it away. The man had spent a decade in Azkaban for his master and had walked out of it still devoted, and the devotion was the tragedy regardless of what it had been aimed at. The afternoon had a strange, deflated quality, the specific atmosphere of a castle that has held a significant tension and released it suddenly. Snow fell again, softly. The remaining students had no idea anything had happened and played exploding Snap in their common rooms. The giant squid rose briefly to the surface of the lake as if coming up for air and then descended again. Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room with his feet up on the table, reading the Veela Bond book he'd borrowed, and felt the day settle around him. He was still reading when the fire turned green at 4:30 and Sirius's face appeared in it. Harry was across the room and crouched in front of the fireplace in approximately 1 second. "Merry Christmas," Sirius said. His voice was lighter than the last time they'd spoken, but his eyes went immediately to Harry's face and stayed there. Something happened. Several things happened. Harry looked at his godfather. Thin, still, the Azkaban years hadn't been fully outweighed by months of relative freedom, but sharp. Alive in the eyes in a way that the early letters hadn't quite been. "I need to tell you all of it. And then I need to ask you something." "Ask first," Sirius said. "It looks important. I want you declared my legal guardian. Properly. Through the Ministry." Harry held his eyes. "Dumbledore has agreed to facilitate it. I need to know if you want it." Sirius's face in the green flame was very still for a moment. Then he said, roughly, "Harry. That's not a question. I know. But I'm asking anyway." "Yes," Sirius said. "Obviously yes." A pause, in which he very visibly pulled himself together. "Now tell me the several things." Harry told him. He started at the Yule Ball and went through to the morning's meeting in Dumbledore's office. He left nothing out and softened nothing, because Sirius deserved the whole picture and Harry was through with giving people edited versions of his life for their comfort. Sirius listened without interrupting, which Harry knew cost him. He was not constitutionally a quiet listener, and his expression cycled through a series of things that Harry catalogued: fury, grief, the specific gutted look of a man hearing about harm done to someone he was supposed to protect, and then something that settled into a fierce, focused quality that Harry recognized as the Black family going to war in the only version of itself that Harry found useful. "The blocks," Sirius said, when Harry finished. 11 deliberate. Dumbledore confirmed it. He confirmed it. He did. Harry paused. He's cooperating. Sirius stopped. The focused quality sharpened into something that took a moment to identify because it was so unexpected on Sirius's face: restraint. The deliberate, effortful choosing of a response rather than a reaction. "All right," he said. "All right. You've handled this better than I would have. I had time to think. You're 14. People keep noting that," Harry said. Something almost like a laugh from Sirius, short and warm. "Your father would have stormed that office in the first 5 minutes and improvised the legal strategy on the spot. It generally worked, but there was a great deal of collateral." He looked at Harry steadily. "You planned it. You built the case before you walked in the door. I had help. Hermione. And Fleur." A pause. Sirius looked at him with the assessing attention of someone who has just identified a new variable. "Tell me about Fleur Delacour." Harry told him about that too. The bond, what it was, how it had activated, what Fleur had told him, how they'd spent the last 4 mornings. He told it directly, without teenage embarrassment, because the situation was too real for performance and Sirius was the one person in his life he suspected would not manage his responses. He was right. Sirius listened without the careful, handled quality that adults applied when teenagers talked about relationships. He listened like a person hearing information. "A Veela mate bond," Sirius said. "Your mother used to say that Veela instinct was the oldest magic still in daily practice. She found it fascinating." He paused. "She would have liked Fleur. From what you're describing." "Yeah," Harry said. "I think so too." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "You're different," he said. "From the last time we talked. From the letters." "I know. Different good." "I think so. Do you need me there?" Sirius said. "I can be in the country within the week." "Not yet. After Christmas, maybe. The exoneration process will go faster if you're accessible." Harry paused. "And I want you to meet her." Sirius looked briefly, brilliantly delighted in the way of someone who had reserved the right to find things enjoyable and was exercising it fully. The Veela who single-handedly dismantled 14 years of Dumbledore's architecture in 60 seconds. "That's her." "Yes," Sirius said, "I definitely want to meet her." They talked for another 20 minutes, practical things, logistics, the Crouch situation and what it meant for the Ministry's Voldemort is not back position, which Sirius had thoughts about that were pointed and profane in equal measure. When the fire faded back to orange, Harry sat on the hearthrug for a moment and felt the specific warmth of a thing that was supposed to be in his life finally beginning to be in it. The second task arrived on a February morning with the peculiar inevitability of things you've been thinking about for weeks. The Black Lake in late winter had the color and temperature of someone's worst assumptions about the afterlife, gray-green, opaque, producing a cold that radiated upward from the water's surface even when you weren't in it. The stands were full, hundreds of people wearing so many layers they looked like enthusiastic bundles of wool. The Beauxbatons and Durmstrang contingents occupied their usual sections, and the noise was the specific charged noise of a crowd that wants something to happen. Harry stood at the water's edge with the 4 champions and felt entirely calm. He had known about the task, retrieve the thing taken from you, 1 hour, since December. He had spent January preparing for it with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has decided that winging it is what you do when you haven't had time to prepare, and he'd had time. He had gillyweed, which Neville had identified from a 6th-year herbology text and which Harry had obtained from the greenhouses with Professor Sprout's assistance after explaining, with the straightforward honesty of his new operating mode, exactly what he needed and why. He had also spent 3 evenings reading everything the restricted section had on underwater magical environments, which had produced the additional information that his new, unblocked magic would function at essentially full capacity underwater rather than the significantly reduced capacity most wizards experienced. Water suppressed learned magic but responded well to instinctual magic, and Harry's instinctual magic was, at this point, considerable. He looked sideways at Fleur. She was composed, which he understood meant she was doing active work to be composed. The lake was her specific vulnerability and she knew it and had prepared for it, but preparation for a genuine weakness is different from the absence of the weakness. "I'll go first," he said, quietly enough that only she heard. She looked at him. "The task starts in 5 minutes. I can be in the lake before the whistle." He held her eyes. "Your hostage, the Beauxbatons girl from the carriage, Gabrielle." Fleur's composure flickered very slightly. "Yes. I'll get her first. Before I get Ron." He paused. "Actually, can you get into the lake at all? You don't need gillyweed, your Veela fire should work as a heat source against the water's magic." "Not perfectly, but enough. I've been practicing," she said. "I can survive the lake for approximately 30 minutes before the cold suppresses my fire magic too severely. Half an hour is enough. Enter from the northern bank, the hostages are in the Mere People village at the center, roughly due east. You'll hear the song." He looked at her. "We do this at the same time but independently, and if we happen to arrive at the same place, then we are efficient," Fleur said. "Not cooperating. There is no rule against efficiency." "There's no rule against it," Harry agreed. The whistle blew. Harry ate the gillyweed in one efficient movement that he'd practiced because the texture was appalling and thinking about it made it worse, and walked straight into the lake before anyone else had moved. The cold hit him like a wall and then, as the gillyweed took effect with a speed that suggested his enhanced magic was metabolizing it faster than normal, the cold became manageable. Gills opened along his neck. Webbing spread between his fingers. He was underwater and moving within 15 seconds of the whistle, which, from the muffled sound of crowd noise above the surface, seemed to have produced a significant reaction. Underwater, the Black Lake was a different world. Gray-green light filtered through water so cold it was nearly blue. The bottom was below visible range, a darkness that moved. Weeds trailed upward from unseen depths, enormous and silent. Things moved in the peripheral dark, not hostile, not yet, simply present, the lake's permanent population going about their business with the equanimity of creatures who owned the space. Harry moved fast. Unblocked, his physical magic, the instinctual body-level magic that athletes and fighters used without thinking about it, worked with him rather than against him, and the gillyweed transformation felt more complete than he suspected it normally did. He moved through the water with a speed that would have surprised him a month ago. He heard the Mere People's song within 2 minutes. The Hogwarts version of it was eerie and directional, designed to be a beacon, and he followed it east into increasing murk. Things shifted in the water around him. He felt the Grindylows before he saw them, several dozen of the small vicious creatures spreading in an arc ahead of him, tentacles spreading, their green faces lit with the particular enthusiasm of creatures that enjoy this event specifically. Harry raised his wand, the water resisted but his magic pushed through the resistance as if it weren't there, and cast a widespread reductor that cleared a corridor through the Grindylow formation without injuring any of them severely. Just scattered them, which was sufficient. They regrouped behind him, complaining in the high clicking language of their kind, but didn't follow. He found the village in 11 minutes. The Mere People settlement was a cluster of crude stone dwellings on a raised section of lake bed, inhabited by the gray, wild-haired creatures who had always struck Harry as significantly more intelligent than they were given credit for. Several of them watched him arrive with the assessing patience of people who have seen this before and have opinions about it. The hostages were tethered at the village center. Ron, Hermione, Cho, and, smaller, blonde, looking entirely peaceful in the magically induced sleep, Fleur Delacour. Harry assessed the situation in approximately 3 seconds. He could feel Fleur entering the lake from the north, not directly, but the bond gave him a faint directional sense of her that was useful here. She was moving fast. She'd reach the village in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. He freed Gabrielle first. The mere people chittered and moved toward him, and he held his ground with a steadiness that made the nearest one pull up short. Not threatening, just immovable. They let him work. He had always been able to communicate something to magical creatures that bypassed language, and what he was communicating now was, I am not afraid, I mean no harm, and I will not be stopped. The mere people understood this in the way that creatures who have been navigating their own power for millennia understand expressions of genuine confidence. He freed Gabrielle and tucked her close, maintaining her sleeping state because waking her in this environment would be cruel. He looked at Ron, who had the specific expression of someone deeply asleep who is also somehow deeply irritated about being asleep. He freed Ron too. Freed Hermione. He was not going to leave the others regardless of what the rules said about it. He was steadying all three when Fleur arrived. She came from the north in a trail of warmth that was visible in the cold water as a shimmer, her fire magic working against the lake's suppressive cold, creating a corridor of slightly higher temperature that she moved through like a controlled burn. She was not as fast as Harry underwater, and her movements were careful rather than fluid, but she was there and she was functional, and her eyes when she found them in the murk had a quality in them that made the mere people fall back a pace. Full Veela in water. It was, Harry noted, impressive. She found Gabrielle in Harry's arms and stopped. Her expression went through several things very rapidly: relief, the visceral relief of a sister, followed almost immediately by the complicated recalibration of finding that the problem was already solved. She looked at Harry. He looked back. She took Gabrielle from him, shifting her younger sister against her shoulder, and something in the movement was so naturally, completely that of a person who loves someone that Harry had to look away for a moment. He was managing 4 people in cold dark water at increasing depth. He cast a bubblehead charm on Ron and Hermione, attached a buoyancy charm to Gabrielle, and they began moving upward. Fleur held her sister with one arm and used her wand with the other, and they broke the surface together, all 6 of them, approximately 22 minutes after the whistle had sounded. The crowd noise was immediate and enormous. Harry didn't hear most of it. He got Ron and Hermione to the bank, checked that Gabrielle was waking properly, and stood on the lakeshore breathing the sharp February air while the gillyweed transformation reversed itself in the efficient, mildly uncomfortable way of biological changes undoing themselves. Ludo Bagman was talking very loudly about something in the direction of the judges' table. The judges themselves, Dumbledore, Maxime, Karkaroff, Crouch Sr., whose own complications were extensive but separate, and Bagman, were in a visible conversation that had the quality of people recalibrating a scoring framework. Harry wrung water from his sleeve and paid zero attention to any of it. Fleur was beside him on the bank with a warming charm wrapped around Gabrielle, who was awake and wide-eyed and looking at Harry with the frank, absolute stare of a child who has recently been rescued and doesn't see why she should be subtle about her opinion of this. Harry Potter saved you, Fleur told her, in French, and in English for Harry's benefit. Gabrielle looked at Harry and then held out her arms with the uncomplicated boldness of a 7-year-old who has decided something. Harry, who had very little experience with small children and had not expected this development, looked at Fleur. Fleur, for the first time in his experience, appeared to be suppressing genuine amusement rather than humor that had already resolved into the small private smile. She nodded very slightly in the direction of the outstretched arms. Harry crouched down to Gabrielle's level. Gabrielle grabbed him around the neck with the grip strength of someone much larger. He held her carefully and looked sideways at Fleur over the top of the child's head. Fleur looked back at him. The amusement was still there, and underneath it, something real and permanent and quietly extraordinary. The judges awarded scores. Harry heard them dimly. The numbers were high, higher than his first task scores, high enough that Ron produced a genuine shout from somewhere to his left. Fleur's scores were also high, adjusted upward by Maxime with a specificity that suggested she was building a legal argument into the scoresheet. Cedric had surfaced shortly after them, dripping and slightly weed-encrusted but intact. Victor had come up last, looking thunderous in the specifically controlled way of someone who is too dignified to show that they're furious. None of it particularly mattered to Harry. He had gone into the lake, accomplished what he'd gone to accomplish, come back with everyone he was supposed to bring and 2 people he wasn't supposed to leave behind, and the scores were a downstream consequence of the doing rather than the point of it. Hermione appeared at his elbow, still damp but wrapped in a borrowed cloak, with her notebook and the expression of someone who has been composing sentences in her head for 22 minutes and is now ready to deploy them. "The judges had a significant discussion about scoring," she said. "Your time was fastest by 4 minutes. The hostage count was, technically non-standard. But there's no rule against retrieving additional hostages." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore looked, she paused, finding the word, "I don't know." "Not pleased exactly." "Adjusted." "He's doing a lot of adjusting lately," Harry said. Ron arrived with 4 steaming cups of something hot that a Hogwarts house elf had materialized from somewhere, distributed them with the confident generosity of someone who has decided the afternoon calls for it, and said, "You went first." "I did." Before the whistle technically finished. "Technically." Ron grinned. The grin had the full, uncomplicated quality of his best ones, the ones without any of the complicated edges that had been there in December. "Brilliant," he said. "Absolutely mental, but brilliant." Fleur had Gabrielle settled on a bench with a warming charm and a cup of something hot and was speaking rapidly in French, debriefing, Harry thought, the systematic check-in of an older sister making sure a younger one is genuinely alright beneath the surface. Gabrielle answered in the decisive, emphatic French of children, gesturing periodically in Harry's direction. When Fleur came back, she stood beside Harry and looked at the lake, which was returning to its normal winter blankness as if nothing had happened beneath it. "She wants to know," Fleur said, "if you are my boyfriend." Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur was looking at the lake with perfect composure. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was complicated." And she said that is what adults say when the answer is yes." Harry looked back at the lake. "She sounds perceptive. She is 7 and absolutely convinced she is right about everything. It is a family trait." A pause. "She is not wrong, in this case." The word yes sat in the air between them without needing to be said explicitly, which was the comfortable thing about honesty. Sometimes it arrived without ceremony, filling a space that had always been its shape, and you didn't need to make an announcement of it. It was simply real, the way the lake was real and the cold was real and the bond was real and the task that was coming was real. Harry looked at her. She was looking at him now. "After the 3rd task," he said. "When this is over. Can it be less complicated?" Fleur looked at him with the expression she only ever had when it was just the 2 of them and the privacy was sufficient and the honesty was the whole point. "Yes," she said. "When this is over." The February sun had broken through winter clouds for the first time in days, thin and pale and genuinely warm where it hit. It hit the lake and fractured into light. It hit Fleur's hair and turned it into something that had nothing to do with Veela allure and everything to do with ordinary winter light on ordinary blonde hair and a girl standing in it who was 17 and brilliant and exactly what she appeared to be. Gabrielle appeared at Fleur's elbow, looked at Harry with the evaluating stare of a child making a final determination, and apparently arrived at a satisfactory conclusion, because she took Harry's hand with her small one and held it with the uncomplicated possessiveness of someone who has made a decision about who they like and doesn't see why they should keep it to themselves. Somewhere above and behind them, in the castle, things were moving. Sirius's exoneration paperwork had been filed 3 days ago through a ministry advocate that Dumbledore had engaged with the quiet efficiency of a man making good on debts. The magical records were being compiled. A healer from St. Mungo's, independent, specifically chosen for her absence of loyalty to anyone in the situation, was scheduled for February 15th. And somewhere beyond the wards, in a darkness that was patient and rebuilding and had not yet given up on anything, something felt the shift in Harry Potter's magical signature and recalculated. The 3rd task was coming. The trap at its end was still there. The difference was that the person walking into it was no longer the one the trap had been designed for. Gabrielle swung their joined hands once, with the cheerful, physical expressiveness of a 7-year-old who has decided the afternoon is good and intends to communicate this to anyone in range. Harry laughed. The sound surprised him slightly, the genuine, uncomplicated kind that didn't happen as often as it should. Fleur looked at him when he laughed, and the look was warm and real and settled, and the February sun was on the lake, and the scores were whatever they were, and the task was done. Chapter 5, The Greater Good is a Cage. Sirius Black arrived at Hogwarts on the 14th of February, which was either romantic timing or coincidence depending on your perspective, and Harry suspected it was neither. Sirius had simply moved the moment the ministry paperwork cleared and had not looked at a calendar. He came through the Fleur in McGonagall's office at 7:30 in the morning, which meant Harry got the message via a Gryffindor prefect at breakfast and covered the distance between the Great Hall and the Transfiguration Wing in approximately 4 minutes, which was faster than his firebolt's ground speed at low altitude. Sirius was standing in the middle of McGonagall's office looking like someone who had not fully decided whether to be overwhelmed or furious and had landed on a tense middle ground of both. He was thinner than his photograph, the one from the Daily Prophet, the screaming one, but present in a way photographs couldn't convey. Alive in the way that people who have been close to death and survived it are alive, with an intensity that regular living tends to sand down. Harry stopped in the doorway. Sirius looked at him. The tense middle ground dissolved into something that didn't have a clean name, the specific expression of someone seeing a person they love and finding them more whole than expected, which was its own complicated relief. "You're taller," Sirius said. "You're not," Harry said. Sirius crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Harry into the kind of hug that doesn't calculate itself beforehand, which was the only kind Harry had any experience receiving that felt real. He was briefly aware of McGonagall making a quiet exit, which he appreciated. They stood like that for a moment that neither of them counted. Then Sirius pulled back and looked at him with the assessing attention of someone taking full inventory. "The blocks," he said. "You feel different." "I am different," Harry said. "In the good way." "I know. I can feel it." Sirius's magical sensitivity had been sharpened by Azkaban in the way that near-total sensory deprivation sometimes sharpened perception. Prison had taken almost everything from him and had accidentally left him with an awareness of magical signatures that most wizards didn't develop. He was looking at Harry now with that awareness running fully. "Your father had a signature like this. After his 7th year, when everything settled into place." He paused. "James spent his first 6 years at Hogwarts with his magic running about 60% of what it became in 7th year. We thought it was just late development. A beat. Now I'm wondering." Harry sat in the chair across from McGonagall's desk. Sirius took the other one, the one students usually occupied during lectures. He sat in it with the posture of someone who has been in enough headmasters' offices in his life that deference to the furniture is not a reflex. "Were there blocks on my father?" Sirius was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I never examined his magical architecture specifically. But looking back at the pattern," he stopped. "James was brilliant from the start, but his power came on very suddenly, very late. And then Dumbledore started paying close attention to him in 7th year in a way he hadn't before." He looked at Harry. "I don't know. But it's a question." Harry stored it. Not urgently, it was a tributary rather than the main river. But it mattered. "The exoneration," Harry said. "It cleared?" "Fully. Peter Pettigrew is officially named as the secret keeper and the actual traitor. Wormtail's name is on the conviction record, and I am," he said the word like he was still testing it, "free." A pause. "Dumbledore moved remarkably quickly once you gave him the instruction to." "He's cooperative," Harry said. "I think he's genuine about it. I also think genuine doesn't mean I stop verifying." Sirius looked at him with the expression Harry had seen from Fleur and McGonagall and Hermione, and now Sirius, the one that was adjacent to disbelief but had settled into something more like respect. 14, Sirius said. "People really do keep saying that. Because it keeps being relevant." Sirius leaned forward, elbows on knees. "The independent healer, tomorrow?" St. Mungo's. Healer Josephine Pye. She specializes in soul-level magical diagnostics. She has no connection to Dumbledore's network. She trained in France for her advanced certification, and Hermione vetted her for 3 days before I agreed to the appointment. Hermione vetted her. Hermione vets everyone. It's a service. Sirius almost smiled. Then the almost resolved into something full, warm, briefly brilliant, and Harry understood for the first time what people meant when they said Sirius had once been capable of lighting up rooms. "Tell me about Fleur Delacour," he said. Harry had expected this. He'd told Sirius the basic facts through the flu in December. This was Sirius in person, which was different. "She's brilliant," Harry said. "Actually brilliant, not brilliant for her age or brilliant considering the circumstances. She could outwork most adult witches I know in warding, diagnostic magic, and anything requiring precision under pressure. She's direct, she tells the truth before she tells you what you want to hear, every time, which is rarer than it should be." He paused. "She's 17 and carrying a significant amount of responsibility, and she does it without complaining or needing credit for it. And she takes me seriously. Not the boy who lived seriously. Actually me." Sirius was watching him with something gentle in his expression. "And the bond?" "It's real," Harry said simply. "It's not, it doesn't feel like being swept away or losing myself. It feels like additional information. Like I can always tell the direction she's in, and roughly how she is, and when something is wrong. It's quiet most of the time." He paused. "I like her. Separately from the bond. Which she told me was important and which I agree with." "She told you it was important to like her independently of the bond." "In those words, more or less." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "She sounds extraordinary." "She is," Harry said. "Your mother would have said the same thing," Sirius said. "About distinguishing between what the magic is doing and what the person is. Lily had very strong opinions about magic being used as a substitute for actual relationship." He smiled, and the smile had grief in it, but the grief was the livable kind. James argued that in their case the magic and the relationship were pointing in the same direction, so what was the difference? Lily said the difference was the choice. Harry thought about Fleur saying, "I am not asking you to be anything to me right now except someone I understand to be important." "The choice," he agreed. McGonagall knocked and opened the door simultaneously, her specific brand of courtesy, the knock acknowledging the private space while the immediate entry acknowledged that she had a school to run. "I believe breakfast is still available," she said. "And Miss Delacour has sent word that she would like to speak with Mr. Black at his earliest convenience." Sirius raised an eyebrow at Harry. Harry stood and gestured toward the door with the ease of someone entirely comfortable with all the components of his life occupying the same room. "She wants to assess you," Harry said. "Fairly certain. The bond gives her a protective instinct toward my well-being, and you are the closest adult in my life, so she needs to know if you're trustworthy." Sirius opened his mouth and closed it. "Then, the Veela is going to vet me." "She's thorough," Harry said. "You'll be fine." The healer's appointment was the 15th, a Tuesday, and Harry fled to St. Mungo's from Dumbledore's office with Sirius beside him and Hermione's 11 pages of prepared questions in his jacket pocket. Healer Pye was a compact, unhurried woman of about 50 who moved through her examination room with the efficiency of someone who has long since stopped performing competence and simply exercises it. She shook Harry's hand without the particular charged quality of someone meeting the boy who lived. She shook it like a hand, which Harry appreciated enormously. "I've reviewed the preliminary information," she said, arranging her diagnostic instruments with small, precise movements. "Soul-level examination for residual evidence of deliberate magical impediment. Is that your understanding of what we're here to assess?" "Yes," Harry said. "And you've been informed that such residuals, while diagnostic, are not themselves removable. They are the biological equivalent of scar tissue, present permanently as evidence of the original interference?" "Yes." "Good. Lie back, please." The examination took 40 minutes. It was not uncomfortable, a series of diagnostic spells that moved over Harry like warm light, each one slightly different in texture, each one producing a response that Pi noted in a running record that expanded with every pass. Sirius stood by the window and was quiet in a way that cost him and that Harry noticed and appreciated. Hermione, who had been permitted to attend as a second witness, sat with her notebook and wrote continuously. When Pi was finished, she sat back on her stool and looked at her record for a long moment. 11 distinct residual signatures, she said. Consistent with deliberate architectural impediment, different texture from the environmental residuals, which are also present in significant number. The deliberate placements are traceable to a single practitioner. Same magical signature throughout, updated across multiple sessions spanning approximately 13 years. She set the record down. The earliest was placed when the subject was between 12 and 18 months old. The most recent was placed approximately 16 months ago, consistent with the start of the subject's 4th year at school. She looked at Harry directly. The practitioner who placed these is exceptionally skilled. This is masterwork-level magic, the kind that requires both the knowledge and the capability to execute at the highest level of soul architecture practice. There are perhaps 12 people in Britain capable of this quality of work. She paused. Possibly fewer. Can you identify the practitioner from the signature? Sirius asked. I can provide a formal assessment of the signature's characteristics, Pi said. I cannot in this setting name a specific individual. That determination would be made by the Wisengamot's Magical Forensics Division, who would cross-reference against their registry of known advanced practitioners. A beat. The record I am generating today is admissible as evidence in both British wizarding courts and the International Confederation's tribunal. If you intend to pursue this legally, this document is the foundation. Harry sat up. He felt the examination in a distant way, not physically taxing, but the specific tiredness of having your own history laid out and confirmed. What are my options for formal pursuit? Pi looked at him with the steady, respectful attention of a professional who has decided this person deserves a complete answer. British Ministry Prosecution, Category A violation under Magical Persons Law, requires submission to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. International Confederation Tribunal, requires evidence of cross-jurisdictional impact, which the Veela bond likely provides as it activated in response to the impediment. French wizarding jurisdiction, if the aggrieved bonded party is French and invokes the bond's protective statutes. She paused. The third option is likely the most powerful, as French wizarding law on mate bond protections has no exceptions for prominence or political standing of the accused. Thank you, Harry said. Mr. Potter. She looked at him over her instruments. I have been practicing for 27 years. I have never examined soul blocks of this sophistication or this duration. I want you to understand that what was done to you is not a small thing, legally or personally. You are entitled to take it as seriously as it is. I know, Harry said. I'm trying to take it exactly as seriously as it is. Not more, not less. She nodded. Good. That is the healthiest response I have encountered to this type of diagnosis. She gave them 3 copies of the full diagnostic record, signed and sealed in St. Mungo's official documentation, and sent them back to Hogwarts with the same brisk efficiency with which she'd received them. They were back in Dumbledore's office by noon. The headmaster was at his desk, and something had shifted in his manner over the previous weeks. The controlled warmth was the same, but the management beneath it was gone, replaced by something quieter and less certain. He looked like someone who had put down a heavy instrument and was discovering that his hands were different shapes without it. Sirius sat in the chair beside Harry and said nothing. His presence did the work by itself, the particular quality of a man who had lost 12 years of his life to a mistake made in this office's orbit and who had not resolved that, exactly, but was managing it with the dignity of someone choosing the forward direction. Harry set one of the 3 diagnostic copies on Dumbledore's desk. Dumbledore looked at it without picking it up. I expected this. I know, Harry said. I'm not here to threaten you with it. I'm here because we need to talk about the third task. Dumbledore looked at him. The third task. Crouch told us it's a maze. The cup is a portkey to Little Hangleton. Voldemort needs my blood for a restoration ritual. Harry held the old man's eyes. You've known about this plan for some time. I have suspected the outline of it, Dumbledore said carefully. Then you know the third task can't go forward as designed. Harry paused. Not because I can't handle it. But because the trap stops working if the person walking into it knows it's a trap, which I do, and because letting Voldemort restore himself using my blood when there are alternatives is, he searched for the precise word, foolish. Some would argue, Dumbledore started. That it's a necessary step, Harry said. That facing Voldemort in some form is inevitable and this creates a controlled environment. He looked at the headmaster steadily. I know that argument. I've heard it in various configurations all year, indirectly, every time someone has pointed me toward danger and then stepped back to see what I do. I'm not interested in it. He paused. I'm interested in stopping Voldemort's restoration before it happens, if that's possible. Is it possible? Dumbledore was quiet. The instruments ticked. Fawkes made his low musical sound and then fell silent. The ritual requires your blood, Dumbledore said. Flesh of the servant, bone of the father, blood of the enemy. If he does not have your blood, he cannot use this specific ritual. So we remove the opportunity, Harry said. The cup doesn't become a portkey. The maze still happens, because cancelling the task entirely creates different problems, but the exit leads to the castle, not Little Hangleton. Tom will know his plan has been disrupted, Dumbledore said. He will seek another method. Yes. But a Voldemort who has had to adapt his plan is better than a Voldemort who has successfully completed a blood ritual using the last protection my mother put in place. Harry looked at him. Her sacrifice is still working. You told me that in first year. Her love, the protection she built, it's in my blood. I've been thinking about what it means to give that blood voluntarily to his ritual. He paused. I won't do it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, there are people who would say that facing him, even under those circumstances, is the only way to end it? Harry said. The prophecy. The room changed. The particular held-breath quality of a space where a significant truth lives, waiting. Harry looked at Dumbledore. I know about the prophecy, he said. Not the details. But I know one exists. And I know it's part of why you've managed my development so carefully, not just to protect me from Voldemort, but to make sure that when the end comes, it comes in the way the prophecy suggests it should. Dumbledore was absolutely still. You can tell me what it says, Harry said. Or I can operate on informed inference. Either way, I'm going to make my own choices about how I move forward. The difference is whether I make them with complete information or partial information. He paused. You told me at the start of this that you'd give me honesty. This is where that matters most. The silence was the longest Dumbledore had ever let stand in Harry's presence. Then he stood, moved to the pensieve in the corner, and retrieved a memory that he placed on the desk in front of Harry as a small, silvery sphere. The prophecy, he said, was made before your birth. To understand it fully, you should hear it directly. He indicated the pensieve. I will not summarize what should not be summarized. Harry looked at the memory. He looked at Dumbledore. He picked up the sphere. The prophecy said, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives. Harry stood in the blue light of the memory and listened to a dead woman's voice deliver the architecture of his life, and felt something in him that was neither the collapse he might have expected nor the fury he'd had available since December. It was something closer to recognition. The way a piece of a puzzle looks when it clicks into place, not satisfying exactly, but accurate. Correct. The shape of something that was always true becoming visible. He came back out of the pensive. Sirius was standing now, and his expression was the one from the photograph in some ways, fierce, cornered, but directed inward rather than outward, at something he'd clearly known or suspected and had not said. "You knew," Harry said to Sirius. "I knew there was a prophecy," Sirius said. "I didn't know the content. James told me there was something Dumbledore wouldn't tell him fully, something that made them go into hiding." He looked at Harry with something raw in his expression. "I should have pushed harder to find out." "After everything, stop," Harry said. "Not unkindly. You were in Azkaban. Before Azkaban. You couldn't have changed it," Harry said. "Leave it." He turned to Dumbledore. The old man was watching him with that same stripped-back expression, the one without management in it. "Power the Dark Lord knows not," Harry said. "What do you think it is?" Dumbledore sat slowly. "I have theories." "Tell me them." "Love," Dumbledore said. "In its oldest, deepest form, not sentiment, not affection, but the specific magical property that your mother accessed when she made her sacrifice. The capacity to choose another person's life over your own, without condition. It is old magic, older than most of what we practice, and Voldemort has never understood it because he has never experienced it." He paused. "I have always believed that is what the prophecy means." Harry thought about Fleur perceiving 43 blocks and crossing a room to tell him the truth about it. He thought about Lily Potter standing between a door and a wand and choosing. He thought about Sirius spending 12 years in Azkaban for love of James and refusing to stop being the person who loved him even when the world had decided he was a murderer. He thought about what love looked like when it was not managed or conditional or leveraged. What it looked like when it was simply chosen. "All right," he said. "Then here is what we're going to do." He walked Dumbledore through the plan with the same systematic clarity he'd applied to every other element of this situation. The maze would proceed, cancelling it created more problems than it solved. But the cup would be rerouted to the castle entrance, not Little Hangleton. Independent ward workers, not Hogwarts staff, who Voldemort's people might have additional access to, would verify the portkey destination before the task began. Harry, Fleur, and Cedric would enter the maze with full knowledge of what was at the center, which changed their approach from competitive to collaborative. Victor Crumb's participation in the maze needed examining, because Crouch had had months of access to Crumb's quarters and Harry didn't trust that influence hadn't been applied. Dumbledore listened without interrupting. At the end he said, "You've planned this carefully." "I've planned it with people I trust," Harry said. "Which is different from planning it alone." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "It is." A pause. "The last few months, watching you move through this, I have understood something I should have understood earlier. What you are when unimpeded is not a threat to be managed. It is exactly what I claimed to want and failed to allow." He looked at Harry with an honesty that cost something visible. "I am sorry, Harry. Not as a formal statement, I mean it." "I know," Harry said. "I believe you." He stood. "That has to be enough for now." The evening of the 15th found Sirius installed in a guest suite that Dumbledore had arranged with the efficiency of someone ensuring an obligation was met before anyone could notice a delay. Harry sat on the floor of it with his back against the bed while Sirius sat on the bed itself, and they existed in the comfortable disorganization of two people who don't need to perform ease for each other. Ron and Hermione arrived at 8. Fleur knocked at 8:15, which Harry knew from the bond a minute before her actual knock, a detail he kept to himself because some things were private even in the context of full transparency. She came in and assessed the room in the way she assessed everything, quickly, without advertising it. She looked at Sirius and Sirius looked at her, and whatever assessment they were making of each other was conducted in approximately 4 seconds of direct eye contact before Sirius said, "Sirius Black." "Fleur Delacour," she said, and sat in the chair by the window with the easy composure of someone comfortable taking up appropriate space. Sirius glanced at Harry. Harry looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone not paying attention, which Sirius read correctly as yes, she is exactly as I described, please don't embarrass me. Right, Sirius said. Let's talk about the third task. The conversation ran 2 hours. It was the best 2 hours of planning Harry had ever been part of, which set a bar that the previous efforts hadn't reached, not because those had been bad, but because for the first time everyone in the room was operating from the same information, with the same directness, and without anyone managing anyone else's access to what mattered. Hermione ran the legal component, the diagnostic record, the formal complaint filed that morning with the International Confederation's Magical Persons Division, the French wizarding law petition that Fleur's grandmother had submitted through proper channels 3 days ago. The French petition had already been acknowledged, which had produced a letter to the British ministry that, Hermione described with visible satisfaction, had landed on the minister's desk at 9 a.m. and apparently caused a significant disruption to his Tuesday. Sirius handled the ministry-facing strategy. He knew people, contacts from his Auror training years, people who had been waiting for Voldemort's return to be officially acknowledged and who would move quickly when the right moment arrived. Fleur had specific intelligence from Beauxbaton's connections that she laid out with the systematic efficiency of someone who had been building this file for weeks, Karkaroff's connections to known Death Eaters, Crouch Sr.'s declining mental state and what it suggested about who had been managing him, the specific portkey magic that the false Moody had used on the cup and how it could be reversed. Harry listened to all of it and added to it and felt the specific rightness of a thing functioning as it should, people who are good at different things working on a shared problem without anyone needing to own it. At one point Ron said, quietly but clearly, to Fleur, I was an idiot. About you. At the beginning. Fleur looked at him. You were jealous, she said. It is understandable. It's not an excuse. No, she agreed. But understanding and excusing are different things. She paused. You carried the real Moody across frozen grounds on Christmas Eve without being asked twice. We are fine, Weasley. Ron nodded with the expression of someone who has received exactly the response they needed, not absolution, not dismissal, just the precise acknowledgement of what had happened and a clear statement that the ledger was manageable. Near 10 o'clock, when the plan had been fully mapped and the evening had started its wind down, Sirius said to Fleur, the bond activated because of the blocks. Fleur looked at him. The blocks created a distress signature that the bond responded to. Yes. If the blocks had never been placed, the bond would have activated when we met regardless, she said. The blocks accelerated the activation because of the distress, but the bond itself is not dependent on them. It would have found him eventually. A pause. It had been looking since before I arrived in Britain. I thought the feeling was homesickness. Sirius looked at Harry with an expression that was too many things simultaneously to read fully, but the topmost layer was warmth. Your mother would tell you, he said, that what matters is not the beginning of the thing but what you do with it. She sounds like she knew what she was talking about, Fleur said. She almost always did, Sirius said. The third week of February arrived, and with it, the atmosphere of a castle holding something in tension. The remaining weeks before the third task had the quality of days before a storm, not with dread exactly, but with the heightened awareness that precedes significant events. Students who knew nothing about portkeys or Little Hangleton or blood rituals nevertheless felt it, the way animals feel weather changing, and it expressed itself in them as energy, as louder corridors, as Quidditch discussions with unusual intensity and teachers who were slightly too focused. Harry moved through it with the specific calm that had become his natural mode. He attended classes. He did the reading, more of it than before, because the reading was no longer accompanied by the suppressed power frustration that had made concentration a continuous act of will. He ate properly, slept adequately, spent mornings at the lake and evenings in the common room and afternoons in whatever combination of planning and normal life the day required. He was walking back from the lake on a Thursday morning when Professor Snape fell into step beside him. This was not a usual occurrence. Snape covered the distance between the castle and Harry's position at the lake's edge with the purposeful stride of someone who has decided to do something and committed to it before arriving, which in Snape usually meant it was going to be unpleasant. Harry looked at him and waited. The blocks, Snape said, without preamble. You know who placed them. I know, Harry said. You are handling it with, Snape paused, as if the next word was being selected from a list of options none of which he found comfortable, restraint. I am. Snape walked beside him for a moment in silence. This was, Harry thought, the most uncomfortable Snape had ever been in his presence, which set a high bar. He waited. The diagnostic report, Snape said. I understand it has been filed with the International Confederation. Yes. Then it will eventually come to light that Dumbledore is the practitioner behind the deliberate blocks. The Confederation's Forensic Division will identify the magical signature and cross-reference it against their registry. Snape said this as flat information, no editorial. When that happens, the political consequences will be significant, Harry said. Yes. A pause. I am not asking you to protect him. I know you're not, Harry said. You're telling me what's coming so I'm prepared for it. Snape looked at him sideways. The expression was the one Harry could now read accurately rather than guessing at, not contempt, as he'd always interpreted it. Assessment. The expression of a person who was perpetually determining whether the person in front of him was worth his time, and who had, in recent months, been arriving at different conclusions than before. Your father, Snape said, would have led with the confrontation and built the case afterward. I've heard that, Harry said. It would have worked for him, probably. He had, a long pause, longer than usual, charisma that made confrontation look like invitation. People wanted to come to his side. Snape looked at the castle. You have something different. You make people believe you know what you're doing. Which is more durable? Harry looked at Snape. The man was looking away, which was probably the only reason he was saying what he was saying. Did you know about the blocks? I suspected something was being managed. I did not know the specifics. A beat. I should have pushed further. Why didn't you? The longest pause. Because Dumbledore's judgment has been the most reliable constant in a world where very few things are reliable. Questioning it requires, he stopped. It requires accepting that even the most reliable constant has limits. Which is uncomfortable. Yeah, Harry said. I know. They reached the castle gate. Snape stopped. Harry stopped with him. The third task, Snape said. Whatever you are planning, I want you to know that my potion stores are available. Specifically the medical supplies on the fourth shelf from the left. The warding on that section will not respond to your magical signature as hostile. He paused. As of this morning. Harry looked at him. Thank you, Professor. Snape made the minimal nod of someone who has done the thing they needed to do and considers the matter closed, and walked back through the castle gate with the long-legged purposeful stride of a man who has never moved at any pace other than the one he chose. Harry stood at the gate for a moment. The castle rose above him, full of its complicated loyalties and its long history and all its people, the ones who managed and the ones who were managed, the ones who loved badly and the ones who loved well, the ones who had decided Harry Potter was a piece on their board and the ones who had looked at him and seen a person. He went upstairs to find Ron and Hermione, because they had a meeting at 10 about the ward verification for the third Tasks Cup, and he was not going to be late for it. In the last week before the task, something shifted in Dumbledore. Harry noticed it first in small things, the way the old man looked at him across the great hall, which had the quality of someone releasing a long-held breath. Then in a meeting where Dumbledore laid out the portkey reversal plan with the precise detail of someone who had stopped withholding, and the precision was different in quality from his previous cooperation. Less like giving what was required. More like giving what was owed. On the Thursday before the task, Dumbledore asked Harry to stay after a meeting. Harry stayed. The office was quiet. The portraits watched without pretending not to. I want to tell you something, Dumbledore said, that is not part of any legal proceeding or plan. He looked at Harry with the tired clarity of someone who has finished carrying something and is standing in the relief and the reckoning of it simultaneously. When you were brought to me that night, after your parents, after the house, you were 15 months old. You were sitting in a pile of rubble holding a toy broomstick and laughing. He stopped. Laughing. Everything that had happened, and you were laughing at the stars coming through the ceiling. A long pause. I blocked your magic because I was afraid. But I want you to know that part of what frightened me was how extraordinary you already were. Not your power. You. A 15-month-old child laughing in a ruined house. Harry sat with this for a moment. I told myself the blocks were to protect you, Dumbledore continued. That is true. But there was also a part of me that believed, and I am ashamed of this, and I have been ashamed for a long time, that an extraordinary Harry Potter was a Harry Potter I could not fully control. And I needed to believe I could control the thing I had decided was my responsibility to protect. He looked at his hands. I treated you like a resource before I treated you like a person. That is the honest version. The room was very quiet. Harry thought about being 15 months old in a ruined house, laughing at stars, full of himself. He thought about what 14 years of managed smallness felt like in retrospect, now that he knew the size he actually was. He thought about Fleur's grandmother's letter. The diagnostic report. Sirius at the lake. The sound of 43 things breaking. I know, he said. I know all of that. You do, Dumbledore agreed. Which is, I don't deserve the fact that you know and are still here. I'm not here for you, Harry said, gently but precisely. I'm here for my own reasons. The task is coming and you're the most useful person in the castle for making sure it goes the way it needs to go. He paused. But after. I need you to understand that after, things are going to look different. Sirius is my guardian. The legal proceedings will happen on their own timeline. My life is going to be mine now, in ways that it hasn't been, and I need you to stay out of the architecture of it. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. I understand. Good. Harry stood. The ward verification is tomorrow morning. I'd like you there. Specifically you, because you're the only person in the castle whose opinion of a Portkey ward carries enough authority to actually settle the question. Dumbledore nodded, and something in him that had been braced for the last 3 months shifted and settled, the way the lake's surface settles after something large has moved through it. Harry left the office and walked through the 7th-floor corridor and found Fleur waiting in the tapestry alcove where they'd agreed to meet. She'd felt from the bond that he was in the kind of meeting that ran over, and had simply found a comfortable place to wait without requiring explanation. She looked at him. How are you? He thought about a 15-month-old laughing at stars in a ruined house. He thought about 43 walls. He thought about the space between who you are made to be and who you actually are, and what it costs to cross it, and what it feels like when you do. Good, he said. He meant it precisely. Not fine, not managing. Good. Let's go get dinner. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she reserved for things that were real, the private one, without performance. Then she fell into step beside him, and they went downstairs through a castle that was 1 week away from the end of something, and the beginning of something else that neither of them had vocabulary for yet, but that both of them, walking together through the evening corridor, already knew the shape of. Above them, in his high office, Dumbledore sat with his instruments and his portraits and the specific quiet of a man who has put something down that he has been holding for a very long time. Outside, the February evening was clear and cold and full of stars. Chapter 6, Chosen, not carved. The morning of the third task arrived the way significant mornings always do, quietly, without fanfare, just another Thursday in June that happened to contain everything. Harry was at the lake at 6. He hadn't slept badly. He'd slept the way he'd been sleeping since December, deeply, without the grinding undercurrent of suppressed anxiety that had characterized the first 3 years of his Hogwarts life. He woke clean and present, which was still new enough to notice. The lake was summer now. Not the winter gray of the second task but warm green, the kind that has depth and life in it, the giant squid moving in its slow morning pattern somewhere below the glassy surface. The Quidditch pitch beyond the trees had been transformed over the last week. He'd watched it happening from the tower window, the maze growing tall and fast with the particular speed of magically accelerated hedgerow, until it was 20 feet high and humming with the contained energy of the spells woven through it. He stood at the water's edge and felt his magic. It was bigger than February. Bigger than Christmas. He'd stopped being surprised by this. The unblocking had not been a single event, as he'd suspected that first morning. It was a process, slow and continuous, the power that had been compressed into 14 years of managed smallness expanding outward like something finding its proper volume. He didn't know where it ended yet. He'd stopped looking for the ceiling. Fleur arrived at 6:12, without chocolate this time but with the particular settled quality she had on mornings when she'd slept well and wasn't performing composure because she didn't need to. She stood beside him and they looked at the lake together. "Today," she said. "Today," he said. It had become their word for days that contained something real. Not a summary, more like a tuning fork. A note they struck together to confirm they were in the same key. "How do you feel?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Ready. Not in the way I was ready for the first 2 tasks, that was preparation on top of anxiety. This is," he paused, "just ready. Clear." She looked at him sideways. "No fear?" "Some," he said. "Not about the maze. About what comes after. Everything that gets set in motion today." He turned to look at her. "How are you?" "The same," she said. "Exactly the same." A pause. "My grandmother arrives tonight. After the task. She wants to meet you before the formal council proceedings begin." "I know I should probably be more nervous about meeting a full-blooded Veela elder," Harry said. "You probably should," Fleur agreed. "She is going to like you, which will make it worse, because she will want to talk for several hours." "I can do several hours." "She talks about everything," Fleur said. "Magic, history, philosophy, the correct preparation of bouillabaisse. She has opinions." "Sounds like someone I know," Harry said. Fleur gave him the look. He held it without difficulty. They stood for another 10 minutes in the morning quiet, and it was the specific, unhurried quality of time spent with someone where you don't need to fill it and don't need to explain that you don't need to fill it, and Harry thought this might be one of the things he would remember most clearly when the day was behind them, not the maze, not whatever happened in it, but 6 in the morning by the lake with summer coming on and everything about to change. The champion's tent at the entrance to the maze had the atmosphere of all waiting rooms, artificially calm, slightly too warm, with the particular quiet of people who are thinking about something specific and not saying it. Cedric Diggory sat across from Harry with the focused energy of someone channeling nerves into readiness, and the look he gave Harry when Harry sat down was the look they'd developed over the last 3 months, not quite friendship but something adjacent, a mutual recognition built on the shared experience of being in the same complicated situation with their eyes open. Cedric knew about the portkey. Harry had told him in March, directly, sitting in an empty classroom after herbology. He'd given Cedric the same complete information he gave everyone he needed to trust, and Cedric had sat with it for exactly the length of time required to believe it and then said, with the calm competence that Harry had come to understand was Cedric's actual character rather than a social performance, "What do we need to do?" Victor Crumb sat in the corner. He'd been informed, in a meeting 3 weeks ago involving Dumbledore, Karkaroff, who had been absent, as he was by then running, which was information Harry had registered without surprise, Harry, and Fleur, that Crouch Jr. had placed a mild compulsion on him during the months of access to his quarters. The compulsion had been removed by a specialist. Crumb had received this information with the controlled, furious dignity of someone who has had their mind interfered with and has decided to channel the fury into something useful. He had been cooperative since. Not warm, Victor Crumb's emotional range, at least in English, did not extend to warm exactly. But reliable. Fleur came in last. She sat beside Harry without any particular ceremony, and Cedric noted this with a brief, neutral expression that communicated precisely nothing and everything simultaneously, and then went back to whatever mental preparation routine he'd been doing. Ludo Bagman entered the tent with his usual performative enthusiasm, looking between the champions with the bright-eyed quality of someone running entirely on the surface of the situation, and Harry thought, not for the first time, that Bagman's specific brand of irresponsibility had probably caused more damage in the world than most people's malice, because at least malice was paying attention. Final instructions, Bagman said. The maze is warded throughout. Magical creatures inside, your task is navigation to the center. The Triwizard Cup is at the center. First to touch the cup wins. Standard rules apply, you may send up sparks if you need to withdraw, and a judge will reach you within 2 minutes. He beamed at them. Harry looked at him with the neutral, unimpressed expression he reserved for people who were technically not the problem but were definitely part of the environment that made the problem possible. Any questions? No, said 4 voices, in approximately the same moment. Bagman beamed harder, apparently interpreting this as enthusiasm. They walked to the entrance. The crowd noise hit them first, the stands around the pitch were full, and the sound was the sound of several hundred people who have been waiting for something and are ready to begin. Harry looked at the crowd briefly and found Sirius in the stands, who stood out because he was the only person in the vicinity wearing the expression of a man attending a military operation rather than a sporting event. Hermione was beside him with her hands folded in her lap and the expression she wore when she was running through contingencies. Ron was on Sirius's other side, and his jaw was set, and Harry knew without needing to see his eyes that Ron would be on his feet the moment anything went sideways. Harry raised a hand. Not a wave, an acknowledgement. Sirius returned it with the small, steady nod of a person who has said everything they needed to say and trusts the person they've said it to. The whistle blew. Harry went into the maze and moved fast. The maze had been designed, he understood now, by someone who expected him to be frightened. To be reactive, to encounter each obstacle at the level of a 14-year-old running on blocked magic and adrenaline. The creatures placed at key junctions, he felt them before he reached them, the same instinctive awareness that had moved through the lake unblocked, had been calibrated against the Harry Potter who had existed before December. A blast-ended Scrut at the first junction. A Boggart at the second. A Sphinx further in, asking riddles with the deliberate pacing of something designed to slow a person down. The Scrut he navigated around, not because he couldn't deal with it, but because fighting it was loud and slow and unnecessary when a precisely cast reductor to the hedge wall opened an alternative path in 6 seconds. The Boggart he dealt with in 3. It took the shape of Voldemort, the shadowy, half-formed version that Harry's subconscious had assembled from descriptions and partial memories. Harry looked at it and felt something run through him that was not fear at all. Recognition, maybe. The way you recognize an argument you've already won, in an earlier draft. He cast the ridiculous without breaking stride. The shadowy Voldemort became a balloon. Harry walked past it. The Sphinx blocked the path at the maze's midpoint with the ancient, unhurried confidence of a creature that has been asking questions since before the Ministry existed. She looked at Harry with eyes that were doing more than looking, the particular golden assessment of something very old determining whether the person in front of it is worth the engagement. You may pass without the riddle, she said, if you can answer one question. Go ahead, Harry said. What were you before you became what you are now? Harry looked at the Sphinx. The Sphinx looked at Harry. Smaller, he said. On purpose. Someone else's purpose. The Sphinx was still for a moment. Then she stepped aside, and as he passed, she said in a low voice that wasn't designed for anyone else to hear, the cup is not what it was intended to be. But you knew that. I knew that, Harry agreed, and kept walking. He reached the center of the maze at the 12-minute mark. The Triwizard Cup sat on a raised plinth in a clear space, golden and gleaming in the bright air, looking like something from a fairy story, the hero's reward, the object of desire, the thing you reach after the obstacles and the effort. Harry looked at it with the specific appreciation of someone who understands a symbol while not being governed by it. He waited. Fleur arrived from the northeastern path 90 seconds later. Her hair was loose, she'd come into the maze with it pinned and something in the hedge had caught it, and the unplanned looseness of it gave her the look of someone who has been genuinely through something rather than someone performing effort. She assessed the cup, assessed Harry, and stood beside him. "Any damage?" he asked. "A Dementor," she said. "Someone placed a Dementor in the northwest quarter. I want to discuss the liability of that choice with the tournament committee at length." "You drove it off." "With considerable force," she said, in a tone that suggested the Dementor had not enjoyed the experience. "You." "Standard obstacles, badly calibrated for someone not running on suppressed magic. I came through the hedge at Junction 3. He paused. "There's a Sphinx who asks better questions than most of the professors here." Fleur looked at the cup. "Cedric? Should be about 4 minutes behind us. He was in the southeastern section, I could hear him at Junction 5, he'd dealt with the Acromantula." As if on cue, Cedric Diggory came through the southern path at a controlled run, looked at both of them standing at the cup's plinth, and stopped. He read the situation quickly. Harry and Fleur could have touched the cup several minutes ago and hadn't. "You waited," Cedric said. "We waited," Harry said. "The cup goes to whoever deserves it. You were in the tournament fairly. We weren't." He paused. "Victor's on the eastern path," he was further back. Cedric looked between them. He had the look of someone experiencing a moral recalibration in real time and handling it with more grace than most adults would. "The cup is a port key to Little Hangleton." "Was," Fleur said. "Dumbledore reversed the destination 3 days ago. Ward verification confirmed on Tuesday." She looked at him steadily. "It leads to the school entrance now." Cedric looked at the cup. He looked at Harry. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." A moment. Then Cedric nodded, the full nod, decisive. "Together, then," he said. "All 3 of us." Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Harry. "Together," Harry said. Victor Crumb arrived 2 minutes later, moving through the eastern path with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had been navigating obstacles in a controlled fury since the compulsion removal. He stopped when he saw the 3 of them arrayed at the cup's plinth. Harry walked over to him. Crumb looked at him with the careful, measuring expression he'd worn since the meeting in March. "The cup is safe," Harry said. "The destination was changed. Will you come?" Victor was quiet for a moment. Then, "You vouched for me," he said. "In the meeting. When Dumbledore's people wanted to know if the compulsion had affected my actions in the tournament." "You were a victim of it," Harry said. "Not a participant. Some would have used it differently." "I'm not some," Harry said. Victor Crumb looked at him with an expression that had something behind it that wasn't quite warm but was genuine, the specific regard of someone who takes honesty seriously and is encountering it in a place they didn't expect. He walked to the plinth. All 4 champions touched the cup. The portkey deposited them at the school entrance, exactly where Dumbledore had rerouted it, the broad stone steps outside the castle's main doors, with the late evening air warm around them and the crowd noise from the pitch a distant roar that changed quality immediately as the announcement went out that the champions had reached the cup. They stood on the steps for a moment. 4 people breathing the same summer air, each of them carrying the specific stillness of people who have just come out of something that required full concentration and are now finding the other side of it. Cedric sat down on the steps. Not dramatically, just sat, with the unceremonious practicality of someone whose legs have made a collective decision. Fleur stood with her hair still loose and her arms at her sides and her eyes closed for a moment, which Harry recognized as the thing she did when she was doing inventory, checking each part of herself for damage the way you check a ship after a storm. Victor sat beside Cedric without any apparent self-consciousness about the informality of it. Harry stood and looked at the castle. At the sky above it, fully dark now, thick with stars. He thought about the night he'd come to this school for the first time, 11 years old on a boat across a black lake, looking up at it, having no idea what it was going to be or what he was going to be inside it. He thought about a 15-month-old laughing at stars through a ruined ceiling, and decided they were probably both looking at the same thing. The doors opened. Dumbledore came through first, followed by McGonagall, Madame Pomfrey, and a clutch of ministry officials Harry didn't know by name but recognized by type, the carefully composed faces of people managing significant information in public. Behind them, Sirius. And behind Sirius, at a run that she was controlling into a fast walk with visible effort, Hermione. And behind Hermione, Ron, who abandoned the walk entirely and came down the steps at a pace that was simply itself, Ron, unmanaged and direct. "You're all right," Ron said. It was not a question. It was the specific sentence of someone who has been running a continuous internal prayer for 2 hours and is now receiving confirmation. "We're all right," Harry said. Ron grabbed him by the shoulder, the solid grip of someone who says what matters in physical language first and verbal language second, and Harry gripped back, and then Hermione arrived and the three of them did what they did in moments of genuine relief, which was stand together without requiring it to look like anything in particular. Sirius reached them last, and he looked at Harry with the expression Harry had come to understand was the one that lived under all of Sirius's other expressions, the one that was simply love, the uncomplicated parental kind, the kind that was not about what Harry was or represented or would become but just about him being here and whole and himself. "The cup was clean," Harry said. "I know," Sirius said. "Dumbledore confirmed the destination 2 minutes ago." He looked at Harry. "How was the maze?" "Easier than it was designed to be," Harry said. "For the right reasons." Sirius looked at him for a long moment, and the specific brightness in his eyes was the kind that adults in Harry's life tried to keep off their faces and Sirius had never bothered with, and Harry was glad for it. The aftermath of the third task did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened across several days, in the way significant things actually happen, in stages, with paperwork, with arguments conducted in meeting rooms and corridors, with announcements that arrived in the Daily Prophet in language so carefully calibrated that the careful calibration was itself informative. The official result of the task, for champions tied, having reached the cup simultaneously. The scoring system, designed for a more competitive dynamic, collapsed into the first four-way tie in Triwizard history. Bagman spent 2 days trying to resolve it and eventually declared a joint victory with the helpless pragmatism of someone whose framework has been overtaken by events. Cedric Diggory was named first among equals by popular acclaim, which was the school's way of acknowledging what Harry and Fleur had done without making it a formal record. Harry was fine with this. Cedric had come into the tournament honestly, competed honestly, and arrived at the cup honestly. It was the right result. Viktor Krum left for Bulgaria on the morning after the task. He sought Harry out before going, a brief exchange on the castle steps, the two of them standing in the early light, and said, "If there is a war. When there is a war. I want to know." He meant it as a military statement rather than an emotional one, which Harry understood and respected. "You'll know," Harry said. Viktor nodded. He looked at Harry for a moment with the same genuine regard from the maze. Then he walked to the Durmstrang ship without looking back, which was the most Viktor Krum gesture possible and somehow entirely appropriate. Karkaroff had been found 2 days after his disappearance, attempting to cross the Scottish border on a broomstick with inadequate winter clothing and a plan that had clearly not survived contact with the logistics of actually fleeing. He was in ministry custody, which created the specific legal situation of a Death Eater who had turned witness once before being faced with the need to turn witness again, and the ministry officials involved looked like people adding to a document they'd expected to keep closed. The word Voldemort appeared in the Daily Prophet for the first time in 13 years on the Saturday after the task. Not in a headline, buried in paragraph 6 of a story ostensibly about ministry security protocols, a single sentence that read, "Ministry sources confirmed that evidence suggests renewed activity associated with he who must not be named." It was the journalistic equivalent of a government building quietly unlocking a door it had been telling everyone didn't exist. Hermione had it framed. She put it in her notebook and kept going. Fleur's grandmother arrived on the Friday evening after the task, exactly when she'd said she would, which Harry had been told to expect. Celeste Delacour, née Beaumont, operated on her own schedule with the untroubled certainty of someone for whom the concept of being late had simply never developed relevance. She arrived not through the flue or by owl but by walking through the main gate of Hogwarts with the unhurried authority of someone for whom a castle is an adequate but not overwhelming venue. She was small, considerably shorter than Fleur, with silver-white hair worn loose and eyes that were more gold than silver, the deepest color Harry had seen in any Veela, and a face that had lived long enough to have texture and history in it. She looked at Harry across the length of the entrance hall and he felt, for the first time since the Yule Ball, the particular sensation of being perceived by Veela instinct, not the overwhelming pulse of December but something quieter and more deliberate, a thorough examination rather than a revelation. She walked toward him. She stopped at 3 feet. "So," she said. Her English was perfect, accented in a way that suggested she could speak it without the accent if she wanted to and had decided the accent was part of the communication. "You are who my Fleur has chosen." "I think," Harry said, "it's more that we chose each other." Celeste looked at him with the gold eyes for a long moment. Then she made a sound that was approximately the French ancestral origin of the sound Fleur made, the small precise one, and said, "Good. That is the right answer. Most boys say yes and smile. I figured the distinction mattered to you. You figured correctly." She looked at him with the assessing thoroughness that reminded him very strongly of her granddaughter, except where Fleur's assessment was precise and swift, Celeste's was patient and accumulated, like someone reading a book rather than a headline. "You are larger than expected. Not physically." "I've been told," Harry said. "I am sure you have." She looked past him to where Fleur stood, and the look she gave her granddaughter was a different register entirely, warm and specific, with the particular love of someone who has watched a person grow up and is still seeing it happen. "She has her mother's eyes and my temperament," she said, to Harry rather than Fleur. She was not going to be manageable by anyone who could not stand up to her. "I don't manage her," Harry said. "No," Celeste said. "You don't. That is why it works." She moved to embrace Fleur, who received it with the slightly ungainly quality of someone who is used to being composed and is encountering something that doesn't require it, and Harry looked away to give them the moment. The Veela Council proceedings were not dramatic. They were methodical, long, and conducted in a room in the French Ministry's London liaison office that had wood paneling and excellent tea and the specific atmosphere of a space where important things are said in carefully controlled voices. Harry attended the first session on the Monday after the task with Sirius as his legal guardian and Healer Pye's diagnostic report as the foundation. The council was 7 Veela elders who listened with the complete, patient attention of people for whom this was their life's work. Celeste sat among them, not as Harry's advocate but as a council member, because those roles were separate and she took both of them seriously. The questions were thorough. Harry answered all of them directly, which the council noted approvingly. There was apparently a long history of bonded individuals coming to these proceedings coached by lawyers into carefully hedged answers, and Harry's habit of simply saying what was true produced a quality of attention from the council that was different from what he'd been told to expect. At one point, an elder named Margot, small, ancient, with the absolute stillness of someone who has been very powerful for a very long time, said, "You are not angry." "I am angry," Harry said. "I'm managing it below the level of the proceedings because the proceedings are the right place for it." "Where does the anger live, then?" Harry thought about it honestly. "In the understanding that someone I trusted made large decisions about my life without telling me, for reasons that were partly loving and partly about control, and that the control was mistaken even if the love was real." He paused. "I don't want to punish him. I want it to not happen again. To anyone." Margot looked at him for a long moment. "You understand," she said, "that the council's jurisdiction here is not about punishment. It is about restoration. We can require disclosure, require cessation of interference, require that the records be made permanent and accessible. We cannot imprison. We do not seek to." "I know," Harry said. That's why this is the right venue. The proceedings ended at 6 in the evening. Dumbledore had attended, accompanied by his own counsel, and had given a testimony that was, to the clear surprise of the council's clerk, who had been taking notes and had looked up 3 times, entirely honest. Not strategic honesty. Not managed disclosure. The whole account, including his own reasoning, including the parts where his reasoning was exposed in his own words as insufficient. Afterward, in the corridor outside the liaison office, Harry found himself standing near Dumbledore by accident of navigation. They looked at each other. The corridor was empty except for them. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "Go ahead." "Was it worth it?" Harry said. "The way it played out, the blocks, the management, all of it. Did it produce what you needed it to produce?" Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "I kept you alive," he said. "The blocks created a lower profile. Voldemort's agents, tracking magical signatures through the years, were looking for a power level consistent with the prophecy's implication. What they found was a boy who was powerful but not extraordinary. It bought time." He paused. "Whether it was worth what it cost you," he stopped. "No," he said. "I don't think the accounting works out. I think I could have found another way if I had looked harder, and I didn't look hard enough because the way I chose was also convenient." Harry nodded. "I am going to spend a long time," Dumbledore said, "with that particular understanding." "I know," Harry said. "I think that's as it should be." He walked away from Dumbledore down the corridor and out through the lobby and into the London evening, which was warm and unremarkable and exactly as it should have been. Sirius had a house, number 12, Grimmauld Place, which was grim in name and nature but was being addressed on both fronts with the specific energy that Sirius applied to things he'd decided he was done being defeated by. Harry spent the last week of June there, in a bedroom on the 3rd floor that had been cleared of its previous contents and contained a bed and a window and nothing else yet, which was fine, which was actually perfect, because nothing else yet meant it was going to be his own rather than someone else's version of what he should have. Hermione came for 2 days. Ron came for 4. Fleur came for an afternoon that extended into an evening that extended into the kind of night where people talk until the very small hours, not because they have anything scheduled but because the conversation is more interesting than sleep. They sat in Sirius's kitchen, the one room that had been fully restored, because Sirius had decided the kitchen was the most important room and had started there, and drank tea and talked about the year that had just ended and what came next. "Voldemort," Hermione said, at one point. She said it the way Harry had been saying it for years, as a fact, a word, a name with no particular magic in it. Ron no longer flinched at it, which was a small marker of how much had shifted. "He hasn't stopped." "He hasn't," Harry agreed. "The ritual failed but he's not contained. He's somewhere, with someone, rebuilding. The Ministry is acknowledging it," Ron said. "That's something." "It's a beginning," Harry said. "Not enough on its own." "What are we doing about it?" Hermione asked. The "we" was entirely natural, not assumed. She wasn't asking Harry to define a mission and assign her a role. She was asking what the plan was, because she was in it and they all knew she was in it. Harry looked at the 3 of them across the kitchen table. Fleur, who had her hands around her tea and was watching him with the expression she had when she was entirely present. Hermione, whose notebook was on the table but closed, because this was a conversation rather than a planning session. Ron, whose chess-playing instincts were fully online behind his eyes, already thinking moves ahead. "We build something," Harry said. "Not a defense. An offense. Not waiting for him to make the move, understanding where he's going to move and being there first." He paused. "Dumbledore has been trying to fight this war with information management and controlled sacrifice and very long games. It hasn't worked because Voldemort plays the same game and has fewer compunctions about the pieces." He looked at them. "We play a different game." "What game?" Ron said. "The game where we tell the truth," Harry said. "About everything. About what he is, what he wants, what the cost is. The secrecy is part of how he operates, the fog of it, the denial, the way the ministry spent 13 years pretending he was gone rather than dealing with what he left behind. We take the fog away. He paused. The International Confederation has been watching what happened here. Margot told me 3 more councils have flagged cases of magical individuals with blocked power in Britain, all within the same generation. This isn't just me. It's a pattern. Fleur set down her tea. You want to make this public? I want to make it accurate, Harry said. There's a war coming. The people who are going to be in it deserve to know what they're in it for. Not a managed version, the real one. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. You know, Ron said slowly, for someone who spent most of his life being told to stay quiet and stay small, you have a significant preference for doing the exact opposite. Funny how that works, Harry said. Ron grinned. Hermione opened her notebook. Fleur looked at Harry with the look that was all real, all settled, all chosen. On the 1st of July, Harry went back to Privet Drive. He went because he had decided to, not because he was obligated to. The blood wards that protected number 4 still functioned as long as he could call it home, and the magical protection they provided was still tactically useful in a world where Voldemort's agents were active and his own profile was about to increase significantly. He would stay the minimum time required for the ward magic to refresh, a week, no more. He arrived in the early afternoon. Aunt Petunia opened the door and looked at him, and the look moved through its familiar configurations, the pinched withdrawal, the assessment of what he was going to cost, and then stopped. Recalibrated. She was looking at something different from what she'd been looking at in June, and she could feel it even if she couldn't name it. She stepped back and let him in. The house was exactly the same. The smell of it, cleaning products and Dudley's trainers and the specific scent of carpets hoovered with regularity, was unchanged and entirely familiar, and Harry stood in the entrance hall of the house where he had grown up and looked at it with the clear, unobstructed vision of someone who is seeing something accurately for the first time. It was small. Just a house. Not a power source, not a trap, not the enemy, just a small house where small people had done small, frightened things, and the frightened things had caused harm, and the harm was real, but the house was just a house. Uncle Vernon appeared in the sitting room doorway. He looked at Harry. The usual red-faced authority that Vernon deployed was absent, had been absent since December, actually, in the fractured way that authority absent its foundation tends to become. He looked at Harry for a moment and then went back to his chair without saying anything, which was the most honest thing Vernon Weasley had probably done in years. Harry went upstairs. His room was as he'd left it, small and spare, with the cat flap on the door and the bars that had been removed and patched and the window that looked over the back garden. He sat on the bed and felt the oddness of being here with all of himself present, rather than the compressed, managed version that had lived in this room for a decade. He wrote a letter to Fleur. He wrote a letter to Sirius. He wrote to Hermione and Ron, shorter because there would be more to say in a week when the summer properly started and they were all in the same place again. He looked out the window at the back garden. The magnolia tree in the corner had been there his whole life, and he'd spent a significant portion of his childhood either hiding in it or looking at it from this window, and it was just a magnolia tree, exactly what it appeared to be, no more and no less. He picked up the Veela Bond book he'd borrowed from the library and hadn't returned, because there was more in it he wanted to read. He read for an hour and then stopped at a passage he hadn't reached before. The bond, in its mature form, is not a claim and not a contract. It is recognition, the oldest form of knowledge, which precedes language and logic and does not require their confirmation. In recognizing, the bond does not create something new. It reveals what was always there, and in the revealing, the revealed becomes fully itself. Harry read it twice. Then he set the book down and looked at the magnolia tree and thought about 43 things cracking all at once, and a girl crossing a room to tell him the truth, and the feeling of his own magic finding its proper volume, and how none of it had made him someone different. It had made him more of who he'd already been, underneath everything that had been layered on top. The revealing becomes fully itself. His owl landed on the window-sill at 4:30 with a letter from Fleur, who had fast owls and wrote when she had something to say rather than waiting for a conventional interval. He opened it. "Harry," it said. "My grandmother says the council will issue its formal findings in August, which you already know. She also says, and I am conveying this because she asked me to and not because I am adding my own commentary, that she has not in 60 years of council work encountered a bonded individual who understood the distinction between what the bond does and what the people do. She says it is rare and that I should not take it for granted. I told her I don't. She seemed to believe me. I will be in London on Thursday. Sirius has offered the house, which is generous given that your room is not yet furnished. I will bring furniture if needed. I have opinions about furniture. Come back soon." Harry read it and felt the warmth of it, steady and present the way everything about Fleur was steady and present, and wrote back, "Thursday. The room doesn't need furniture yet. I'll come back as soon as the wards are refreshed. 7 days." He sealed it. He looked at the magnolia tree. He looked at the small room. He was here, now, at 14 years old, with all of himself, the full size of it, the power and the mess and the capacity and the complicated, unmanaged reality of being someone who had been shaped by other people's fear and had found his actual shape underneath. The third task was done. The maze was done. The portkey had gone to the right place. The war was coming. Harry knew it clearly, the way he knew everything now, not with anxiety but with precision. Voldemort was somewhere, rebuilding, patient and certain in the way of something that had survived its own death and had drawn from that survival the worst possible lesson. The Ministry was beginning to acknowledge the fact of him. The people who would fight were beginning to assemble. Harry was going to be in that fight. This was not in question, and he was not performing bravery about it, it simply was, the way the sky was, the way the bond was, the way the truth of who he actually was had turned out to be true. He was not going to be managed into it or sacrificed into it or moved into it by someone else's hand. He was going to choose it. Every day, actively. Because it was right, and because the people he loved were in the world that was at stake, and because he was the specific person whose particular shape of power was relevant to the particular problem, and because being that person, fully, without the 43 walls, was the thing that changed the accounting entirely. He was chosen. By instinct, by bond, by circumstance, by whatever ancient calculus had looked at the shape of his soul and named him relevant to this specific moment in this specific world. But he was not carved. He was not made by prophecy or managed by a well-intentioned architect or produced by the grief of his parents' sacrifice. He was here because of all those things and also because he was himself, underneath and through all of it, always, the boy who had laughed at stars in a ruined house and kept going. The summer evening settled over Privet Drive, warm and ordinary and entirely real. Harry Potter picked up his book, and read, and waited for Thursday.